Thank you very much, Steve, for telling me I was on mute. What a wonderful start. Thank you. Oh, well, I've got something to smile about, laugh about today. So welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I do apologise for the change in arrangements, which were very unfortunate, but I'm happy that we have pretty much a full panel of speakers for you this afternoon, and some really interesting people and applications. So I'm going to waste no more time, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of our presenters to introduce themselves in their sequence, and then to tell us with up to 10 minutes about their work. You'll see some people using presentations, some people just talking about their work, but please type in any questions into the Q&A, and let me know if you have any problems or challenges. So Steve Dunn. Steve Dunn is someone I've known for quite a number of years. He's a co-founder of Medical Realities, who do some great work with medical education and training using 360-degree technology. So I'm going to invite Steve to do his presentation. And Steve, I believe you are going to be using a 35mm slide. So, sorry, I believe you're going to be using, sharing a slide presentation.
Yes, yeah, I think now we're on Zoom. I feel a bit more confident about using the slides, David.
Okay, well, over to you, Steve.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. Thank you for the introduction. I'll just see if I can get my slide deck up. There we are. Yes, David, thank you. My name is Steve Dunn. I'm the co-founder and chairman of Medical Realities. My background originally in film and television technology, and that led me into working in augmented reality and virtual reality. And about 5 years ago, I had the very good fortune to meet Professor Shafi Ahmed at an event at the Google campus here in London. And we started to talk about the problems in healthcare and healthcare training. And really, we haven't stopped talking since. We started to focus on how new technology could make meaningful changes in these areas. And we decided we'd try something. We'd try and harness the power of virtual reality to help in the education, initially of medical students and healthcare professionals. That's brought us to Medical Realities. Our solution has grown into a platform for training and education using extended reality, about which I'll talk a little bit more later. Really, why did we choose virtual reality? And extended reality is just a more sort of souped up version of augmented reality and virtual reality. And we're very excited to be able to use that and use all its interactive properties. Now, why did we choose this and why now? Well, it's a sort of extended reality is an excellent providing top class training and education that has proven benefits in really sort of how people are trained, but also the actual sort of how they easily fit into that training process, and also how quickly they learn, but also how they also retain what they've learned, which is very important. It enables us also to conduct real-time research and monitoring of the use and effectiveness of our training modules. It also helps us in the prevention of clinical mistakes, hopefully going forward, because a better trained workforce is obviously a better workforce all round, and that's very important in the healthcare sector. It also enables us to share our knowledge on a global basis, which is something that we're really keen on doing, about sharing what we know and sort of helping other people and other countries. Because this allows us to have a network of a global network of medical students and healthcare workers now, which we're continually adding to. And in the future, we see it's going to enable us to add therapies to the list of the user modules and training modules that we're creating. So Medical Realities is seen as one of the top disruptive companies in the medical sector in the world. And we want it to be open and as accessible as possible. We can easily change and adapt our training modules very quickly. This is another reason why we've chosen to use the type of platform that we've created. And our platform is entirely scalable on a global basis, so we can reach and talk to as many people as we want. So far, our sort of live record is around about 55,000 people, but normally it's we're actually sort of live to sort of anywhere between 200 and 1,000 people at any one time. And it can be delivered to anybody who's got access to the internet or has a mobile phone. And last but not least, it's the most cost-effective method of delivering training and education that we found. So I'm into that platform, and our platform is designed to run all our virtual reality training modules, and they're coming in lots of different guises. They could be 360-degree videos, they could be simulation work, but the platform is also designed and developed to actually sort of accept other people's content as well. So any content that's created by other third-party developers in virtual reality or augmented reality can actually be run on our platform with ease. Thought I'd just quickly touch on a couple of our sort of B2b medical training things that we're doing. We're working with AIMS, which is an Italian university, which actually has two campuses, one in Bari in Italy and one in Madrid in Spain. And we've actually worked very closely with them to conceive and deliver a virtual reality curriculum based on their particular educational needs. And this has proved very, very useful. In fact, a lot of us, I think we've got probably over 2,000 medical students, because it's not only students that are at the university that have used our platform, also they tend to stick with the platform to see what other things are on going forward, which is great. And we've also got an ongoing program actually for training ward staff in conjunction with Health Education England. This is a project for training, and it's something that we're really, really happy with going forward. On the global side, we've been working with the University of Leeds and National Institute of Health Research to provide virtual reality training for particularly surgeons in Sierra Leone, because they have some particularly pressing needs for extra and precise education. And also we're working very closely with the Eden Multicare Hospital in Bangladesh to help train their surgeons and create a sort of larger hospital, because they wish to grow that hospital as much as possible. And we're very glad that they've chosen our platform to do that. So our global impact has been profound, and that I think that shows how we've been going forward. Our medical reality platform is used for ongoing training and education around the world, as I said, and we wish to expand out and partner with people. So we're always open to listening and partnering with people in the healthcare sector. And last but not least, I see extended reality in healthcare as being the future. Thank you for listening to my sort of little talk. And here's all my contact details if anybody needs to get in contact with me. And thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much for that, Steve. I think it was a very interesting presentation. I want to, at this part of the session, to give the three other presenters a chance to make their presentations, and then we can lead into a panel discussion about the applications. So this first section is really focusing on the developers of solutions for medical education and training. So now I'm going to hand over to Xavier Abadi of Sim4Health, and he's going to talk about some of the work that he's been doing in France. Xavier.
Thank you very much, Dave, for this introduction, and thank you very much for hosting us today. I'm going to share my screen and directly go to, there you go, should be able to see it. Perfect. So the idea, I am, so my name is Xavier Abadi, and I'm in charge of the international development at Sim4Health. Sim4Health is a young company that is 5 years old. And I was actually mentioning to David just prior to getting online that The Giant was one of my first show with Sim4Health 4 years ago. So it's nice to be back. So the idea of Sim4Health has been from the very beginning to digitalize the healthcare environments to provide simulation solutions for healthcare professionals. So exactly the same idea as you would expect pilots to spend hours in flight simulators prior to getting us anywhere we would like to go in these times. We recreate healthcare environments to train medical healthcare professionals, whether they are nurses or doctors. So as I said, Sim4Health is a young company yet, 5 years old, depends on an older company, which is, I would say 15 years old, that started as an agency in communication for the healthcare environments and mostly for medical devices and pharma companies, but also working with insurance and healthcare stakeholders in general. In this couple of years, we have achieved a number of, how would I say that, achievements that we are happy with. Being a panelist in the Stanford Medicine X Congress back in 2017. I was lucky enough to pitch at the Galleon Prize, Startup Galleon Prize, also in 2018 this time. Selected by the CES, basically a lot of experiences here. What is important to understand, or at least what is very important to us, is that we work on three different legs. One is, of course, the medical or nursing relevance. It has to be very, very accurate and very, very relevant to the exact way that nurses and doctors are actually learning or practicing. It has to be pedagogical, of course, and technological, not for the sake of technology, not just because technology is nice or because we're geeks, but because at some point we do believe, as Steve just said that at some point it can really bring something new in the way that our healthcare professionals are trained. A couple of the references that we work with, most of these names: the Red Cross, Stanford Medicine, G&G, or Sanofi or Novartis in the industry. I'm running very quickly through that to focus more on what we do. And what we do is, as I said, recreate, remodelize different environments, so to train people. So those environments can be, of course, so those personalizations can be, of course, environments. Here, got a dialysis room. Here in the middle, an OR, and this gentleman here is going to have cardiovascular procedure in VR. We are able to model different kind of software or interfaces of different machines that you can find in an OR, in the ICU, whatever kind of technicity it is. And of course, all different medical equipments, medical devices that you can find anywhere in the medical practice. And last but not least, of course, avatars, dialogues, and personalization to environments, but also localization to different places, different countries, different continents. It all can be adapted to any situation that actually is found worldwide. So basically, of course, simulation has been existing for years, well, forever, I guess, in the medical studies and nursing studies. It started from standardized patients. I am the doctor. Somebody else plays the patients, and then we reverse and we play roles. We all know mannequins. We all know high fidelity mannequins that have appeared recently, and that can recreate real, how would I say, life situations, and very, very close to reality situations in the OR, in the ER, wherever. From what we do and what we are, digital simulation is another layer of simulation that is now existing, that can be accessed through different means, and we will see them in the couple of next slides. And when we start to the clinical situation from left to right, from books to practice, of course, it all starts with theoretical learning. It all starts with clinical reasoning. And from there, we will move different aspects or different solutions to embark, to train, to educate our healthcare professionals. As for all simulation procedures, whether they are digital or face-to-face, or at some point at the end of this pandemic, something in the middle. We talk more and more about blended learning, but also digital solutions that will make physical and face-to-face meetings, but also remote and digital ones. The idea is to start by doing remotely from a computer, a tablet, whatever. And then we have a debriefing section, face-to-face, and with statistics, with different options. And we move then to practice, and VR then is a very, very interesting way to train. It's an active practice. It's very good to master procedures, environments, and generate automatisms. We all know it because it's been studied and published that VR is really a very powerful solution to learn and to be immersed, because you are actually doing what you're trying to learn. And we've developed new versions of VR. It started from VR where you play as a single player, and we've developed VR multiplayers where, for example, in an OR, you could have a surgeon, you could have a nurse, you could have an anesthetist. And we've developed, for example, a case that is the start of a fire in the OR, which is not very frequent, obviously, and unfortunately, but that happens. How do I react as the surgeon? How do I react as the anesthetist? Close different gases and everything, and how do I work in terms of teamwork and communication within the different players in the scenario? So when you decline that to what we do, I've just talked about virtual reality simulators. You can see here with the VR helmets. We have virtual patient simulators, virtual consultation. You are a doctor, in front of you is an avatar, a virtual patient coming in to consults, and you have to understand why the patient is in front of you. So kind of work on your clinical reasoning, work on your ability to prescribe, to understand, to analyze the situation. And we have screen-based simulators that offers wider environments where you can, for example, wander in an OR, in an ICU, or in the hospital, in the ward, to understand better how it works and different procedures. So the screen-based simulators are accessible through a platform that is called MedicActive, that is proprietary, that we've developed initially. That was this is the core platform and the core project of Simple Health. It's really is the core of our advantage. It's that platform where each and every one of our customers, whether it's a university, whether it's a medical faculty, whether it's a nursing school, have their own dedicated space, whether it's also a pharma company or a medical device company. They have their own dedicated space with their simulators in there, and they have all the back office that is available to them. So to master their trainees, their training sessions, who's been connecting, and all the KPIs, sorry, that are linked with the training sessions that they are programming. Virtual reality can also be led from the platform, but of course they are also played directly from the VR helmets, whether they are as this one linked to a computer, or whether they are as the newest versions and the newest products, what we call standalone VR helmets, like the HTC Focus Plus. They don't come with any cables. It's just some goggles that you put on. Everything is embedded into the goggles, and from there you can directly play. You don't have any setup. You don't have any complicated things to do. Just switch on, select your experience, and start the VR training. And as I was saying, all these elements do come from this Medic Active platform, which is quite heavily used, and that leads me to explain why the figures are getting quite important, because during the first pandemic lockdown that we have had in France, that lasted almost 2 months, we've decided almost immediately to do two things. First of all, and I will start by that and come back to the previous slide. We had developed a series of 10 different simulators, actually 11, and 9 on screen and 2 on VR for nursing studies in France. Nursing studies in France are 3 years long, and students must acquire 10 competency throughout the 3 years of their studies. Each one of these competencies has been kind of designed as a simulator, and we've decided, like, I think it was the first weekend of the lockdown, the first weekend that we were stuck home, to open this platform to all of the nursing students in France for free. So it was a pro bono action, and that lasted for almost 4 months, the whole time of the lockdown, the first lockdown, because we are actually in the second lockdown in France, but also until the end of the student year. That means end of June. So that led a lot of traffic on the surface, on the platform, sorry. And the second action, and this is also something that we are very proud of at Sim4Health, is a simulator that we have designed and done with the Bordeaux University Hospital and the Bordeaux University Medical Faculty. Why? Because first of all, we're based in Bordeaux, in southwest of France, and Bordeaux Hospital was the first hospital in France to manage and to welcome COVID-19 patients. It was the first case in France, the first actually that was discovered, and it was in Bordeaux, and it was treated in the hospital. So we worked with them. We worked with some of the doctors, trainers, and teachers from the medical faculty and the hospital, and we did this simulator, and it comes in like 4 different parts. The first one here on the left, the patient is feeling sick and is going to see his GP, his doctor, so to understand what's going on. The second part here is what we call the 15 in France. It's our dispatch center, is the number that you have to call if you have any medical emergency, and they will dispatch you either to your local doctor or to the emergency and call the ambulance or the ambulance or the paramedics to rush you to the hospital. And finally, our poor patient is at the hospital in the ICU and is being taken care of. We've developed that also for free as part of our kind of efforts during the pandemics, and we are quite, well, not quite, we are very proud that this simulator was selected by what was called the Health Coalition in France. That is a mix of medical authorities in France and pharma companies and private companies, large corporations, of course, in the medical fields, that have kind of selected a number of different initiatives that were taken in the health environment to fight against COVID. And we launched this Learn to Fight initiative that was awarded by this coalition, and the prize money that went with that enabled us to display 100,000 licenses to students, to doctors in France, through insurance company, to universities, so that they have the ability, or at least the understanding of how to manage a patient 19 COVID in of course, following the French regulations and rules. So basically, and not to be too long because I see the time is flying, these are different images of what we do. It can be like consultation, as I've said already. It can be pluridisciplinary, transdisciplinary work. You see here a ward with, I guess, some nurses, and they are taking some information from each other. It can be here an elderly home, it can be an OR, it can be medical room. VR images, how to work with the dialysis machine, for example, and clean it between two patients. This image here at the right is one of the actual OR of the Stanford Medicine in California, Dunn, California. And I've got some videos here that we don't really have the time to go through, but one of the last experience that I wanted to share with you in VR, I've talked about VR as being very powerful in terms of procedures and how to do things. We've made a great experience and still being used in different continents. It all started in the Middle East and then was deployed in Asia, and it's now being deployed in the US. It's a VR. These are the kind of standalone helmets that I was mentioning. And the whole idea here is not really to work on the medical side of things, but on the emotional side of it. And the idea is to train oncologist doctors, cancer doctors, on the announcement of very bad news, actually metastatic breast cancer. And the idea is for them to take into consideration, or to understand that they have to take into consideration their patient's emotions and fear prior to getting into the treatment options or the scientific information about the disease. Because at some points when you announce such a bad disease, there is no way that the patient can understand what you will be telling them in some kind of medical or scientific way. So you first have to clear here this fears and emotion bubble that appears above the head of the patients. And it's the way of answering the different questions that the patient has. Will I lose my hair? Will I still be able to have children? Will I die? All these questions that unfortunately all the patients have. So this has really got a great success in the ESMO Congress in Singapore exactly 1 year ago, and that was a great experience. A couple of figures, and this is a little more I would say down to earth, but some figures on what's going to be VR in healthcare in the next couple of years, and you see that the figures are just quite amazing. And I don't know, and probably we'll exchange on that when the panels comes in, but the use, we really see the use cases growing, and the adoption rate of these technologies being quite strong. There you go. And these are my details if you want to contact me, of course. David, I think you're still on mute.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you very much for that, Xavier. So we've had a couple of really interesting presentations so far. And before we go into doing a Q&A and a discussion, I want to just have two further presentations in this section, which is designed for developers. And there are a number of questions that are already bubbling up in my mind, particularly about the impact of COVID-19 and the difference between synthetic environments and real 360-degree photographs and interactivity in the type of application. But before we go into that, I'm going to ask David Salt if he would go next and tell us about the work that he's doing in his company. Over to you, David.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Hopefully you can hear me and see me okay. I'm in our immersive space here, so it's a 3 or 4 wall projectors area. We have audio, we have other effects as well. But we believe in immersive that the environment shapes the learning, so we want it as a bit of a shared resource in these times. So we've got about 200 different spaces around the world now, from the Royal Flying Doctors over in Australia to Canada and North America. But we started off on a bit of a strange journey, really. We started off in the special needs market. doing sensory rooms for autistic children, special needs children. As you can see here, we put them in the environments that they can't usually get to, or we do that virtual field trip for them. And very quick, we met a guy called Dr. Mark Forrest from Cheshire Fire and Rescue. He's a doctor on call in the fire department there. And he wants to do full simulation, but very quickly and very easily. So we went out with a 360 camera, shot a few scenes for him, and then brought it into the space. So instead of it being a headset, which are fantastic for the healthcare environment, we believe putting the students in the environment that they'd be working in, where they can see eye contact and really work together in these environments really quickly. And going back to the special needs market, so the shared resources of, you know, a lot of autistic children have real problems going to get the haircut, going to barbers and hairdressers. So our platform is really based on that end user taking a cost-effective 360 camera out and shooting the environments that they're going to be going to or working in, whether it's a barber's shop, whether it's, you know, first responder going to a domestic environment with a dining room set or a living room. And it's all controlled by a tablet. So it's very easy for the instructor to grab hold of the tablet and put the scenes on. So like we say, we use off-the-shelf projectors. So the classroom-based projectors. So our cost, we try and keep the cost down to a minimum. This time last year, we were lucky enough to apply and get granted Innovate UK grant for just short of £350,000 to update our software, to make it a cloud-based software and to make it interactive and make all the walls interactive. So I'll just very quickly give you a demonstration of the interaction. So we got asked by Leader Healthcare over the Middle East to do a COVID application. So you can see here, I can touch on the icons, the hotspots as we call it, and then a video or a bit of text will appear. We can give you a little bit of background on patients, whether it's x-rays, we can scroll through it. So instead of it just being an immersive room, it's a whole learning tool. So we dynamic classroom, as we call it. We can bring props into it, so we can dress the room for whatever you need it to be. And we can localize the text as well. So we've got it in French, Arabic at the moment, Italian. So it makes it a real learning space and a collaborative space. And each wall is interactive, so we can touch over here as well. And what we really want to do is put the students and the users in their environments that they are not used to. So for the paramedics, because a lot of our work is in that first responder world, where it is them going to site and then they come into different environments. So this is a handover. So we work with 5 air ambulances. So the air ambulances asked us to go out and film different environments. And one of the most tricky environments that they find is when they're working with a different handover team and they've got, you know, 2 seconds or 30 seconds to deliver the information to a handover team. You don't interact with the team, it's just about delivering information, but getting the students and users used to the environments and the difficult, tricky environments. But like all the talkers and presenters today, we'll talk about VR and immersive tech, taking students and users to environments that are quite difficult to take them to in a day-to-day experience. So we've filmed the London Underground. We've got over 2,000 different scenes in this playlist, most of interactive. But it's all about the end user being able to create that content, putting the interaction hotspots on and making it their own content. Like I was saying, we've got different effects that we can bring into the immersive space. So whether that's a wind for this environment, or we can bring in smells and smoke. So the smells, we work with the company that works with the London Dungeons. So they've got a database of over 2,500 different smells, and we can bring them into the environment, so whether that's burning flesh, urine, marijuana, and all the nicer smells as well. So we can work with different effects, all on the timeline of the software. So you can just preload it. So if you're doing OSCEs, or every student will get it all at the same time. Our software is developed so it can go cross-platform, even though we concentrate on the four-wall immersive space. Our spaces can range in sizes from 7 meters by 7 meters down to a 4 by 4 meter space, all varied, different sizes of space. But what we really focus on is that user being able to create that 360 content and make it interactive. What we truly believe in, the students should be getting trained in the environments that they will be working in. So whether this is a resource bay over in Warrington Hospital or in Fatima, well, they need to be trained on the environments and the equipment that they will be working on. And it's the same with the sort of domestic environments. So if you're a first responder, you want to be going to the environments that you would be used to being seen. So it's that ease of use of creating that 360 interactive content. Yeah, so the Innovate UK grant got awarded in January of this year, and it's got to be completed by the end of this year. So by March, we will be doing an announcement on the cloud-based share of technology and 360 content. So the Royal Flying Doctor we've been working with for about 12 months now. We're sharing content already with the guys over in Montreal and the learning of that sort of first responders and in hospital situ. So I will leave it there, David. So if anyone's got any questions after, please drop me a line. My contacts are in my username. David, you're on mute again.
I think it's going to be safe if I just leave myself unmuted. Well, thank you very much for that, David. I think we've had 3 fascinating presentations. Kim Vergatini was due to be one of the first presenters, but she just indicated that she has a problem with her connection. So hopefully we will hear from her later. So at this point, I want to try and open it up to be a bit of a panel discussion about what we've seen from these 3 presentations. And I want to begin by asking the presenters what the effect of COVID-19 has been on their businesses. Has it resulted in more businesses? Has it shaped their business in any way? Xavier did mention that he'd been developing applications to train medical staff to deal with COVID-19. What's been the experience generally? I'll start with you, Steve.
Thanks, David. Yeah, the experience has been sort of quite mixed, I think. Interesting enough, it's actually raised awareness of actually how we can use these new immersive technologies in education and training in general. So from that point of view, it's been very, very good. Obviously, I think there's certain challenges from because a lot of the people that we work with are in hospitals, and it's sometimes actually sort of quite difficult to actually sort of go into hospitals and talk to people. So it's all being done, you know, sort of virtually, as we say. So I think it was Bill Gates has actually mentioned that the pandemic has sort of advanced the digital education cause greatly, probably by sort of 5 years in as many months. So I think while it's a horrible pandemic, it's a very dark cloud that doesn't have a silver lining in some areas, and I think it's actually sort of it's helped raise awareness of what we can do and what the other people that have been talking about today, how they can help and actually be relevant actually in training and education going forward from now.
David, can I go to you, because you've actually got a physical environment that people are in, and presumably in that environment you could have several people being trained at the same time normally. So what has been the impact of COVID-19 on your type of application?
Yeah, well, it's definitely raised the profile of training and simulation training. So you know, a lot of the air ambulances are still doing full training, but full PPE. So it was great for that. That was in a safe environment. But what we have learned is that, you know, the physical environments have definitely slowed down a bit. Hence why we did look at the cross-platform and being able to use the 360 content in a different form, whether it was with, you know, some sort of VR headset. Well, you know, we were a firm believer that, you know, everyone's still getting trained, with our rooms being multi-use as well. So I've got a background here. So a lot of our rooms at the moment, if they're in hospital, if they're not being used for training, they're getting used for mental health. So we've got a nice relaxing scene on the background here. So that's mindfulness environment. So we're getting a lot of uptake on that. And around the Liverpool City region, there's a lot of awareness on the young children's mental health. So we've got an alpha drop box, which is an immersive space that we take around. And we use that for a lot for mental health. So yeah, we've had to zig a little bit, but you know, the training, you know, 200 rooms is still being used, just not as much, because like I say, the students have still got to be trained. So they're just using it in a different format. All the walls are painted with a special paint that I wiped down. So it's so even the interaction we can touch, and like we said before, our rooms are around about 4 to 5 meters in width. So you can get 2 to 3 students in here, and we usually use a sim body or a mannequin as the patient. So it's all COVID secure.
So you're really combining 2 different kinds of technologies: the virtual immersive technology with the traditional mannequins.
Yeah. Props work really well in our space. So if we're doing an incident where a young child's being knocked off a bike, we'll put the road scene on and put a push bike in the scene. So they've got to walk and work around the hardware. And it's very important for the air ambulances and the other paramedics and how they lay out the kit. It can be something as simple as that. If they don't lay out the kit wrong, it can throw the whole scenario out of kilter.
And is it am I right in assuming that whoever uses this environment, either the hospital or whatever, they pretty much have to have a dedicated room for this? It's not.
Yeah, it's usually back of the classroom, to be honest with you, or in a sim lab. So yeah, it would always help, but we have put it in the middle of a ward using 3 drop-down screens. So we're very, very flexible. We've used electrical screens to pull down to make a room within a room. But all the hardware hanging from the ceiling, when I switch the projectors off, you've just got a blank wall again. So, you know, you can have meetings near you, you can have online Zooms, or you can do a full sim classroom. So, you know, I've got movable furniture in our boardroom here, so we can have a basic classroom, just push the tables to one side.
Okay, thank you. Xavier, what are your observations about the impact of COVID-19 on your business? Has it generated more work? Is there more work COVID-based, or generally just because people want to train remotely more? What's been the effect?
Well, it is exactly what you just said. People want to train remotely, and we've experienced it's kind of it was a two-way or two-time situation. The very first beginning of what was actually the first lockdown here in France, everything stopped and people were stunned and nobody really knew what to do or what would happen. So we decided to move on and to, as I said, open all the licenses to grant access to our nursing scenarios. And the next couple of weeks, we dealt with a lot of demands from the nursing schools, nursing students that were trying to set up their accounts. So we spent a lot of time doing that and explaining what we were doing and actually the benefits and how to use those training tools, because at some points they were not, for many of them, yet used to using digital simulation. So the new simulation, of course, they do simulation all the time, but getting to the digital one was something new, and it was something that they had to do because they were not able, or they were not, they couldn't go back to schools and find the different mannequins or tools that they were using. I've received an inquiry from a small medical school in Alabama in the US. And the inquiry was, okay, we're stuck, we cannot go back to school, we cannot access our mannequins, what can you do for us? And it came from different legalizations and various countries, so it was quite interesting. As I totally agree with what Steve said earlier, that the pandemic, as bad as it is, also pushed quite a lot the use of digital techniques and technologies throughout the healthcare environments. And of course, telemedicine and telehealth is not the least of them. So that was for, I would say, education and primary education, initial education. From our part of the customer, that is the industry, apart from the two first weeks where they were totally lost and not knowing exactly what to do, they are dealing with many different situations that are quite complex for them. First of all, of course, is the pandemic and the fact that they cannot go to the hospitals. And also in France, the fact that the laws and the regulations on hospital visits for the industry has been a lot restricted lately, and it's getting very, very difficult to meet actually doctors and professors. So this whole part of the industry is definitely looking for some new ways on how to reach and interact with their doctors and their prescribers at some point. So this has led to a lot of work, definitely, but a lot of how would I say that, pioneering also, and getting people to it and giving a lot of advice and spending times on the phone with different nurse educators, and just to help them understand how it works, but more exactly how it can be used in their practice. Because what I am pretty sure of, as well, I'll speak for myself, is that of course, when the vaccines will be there and when we go back to a kind of normal life, it will, some of the aspects of what we've been living will remain, and I guess more and more things will be done remotely, and we'll travel probably a little less, and definitely we're getting so used to all these physio conferences, webinars and everything. So at some point it will leave. Part of it will leave, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask, introduce Aman Kunar, who's joined us. I'm asking him to speak now, unmute himself, tell us a bit about himself, and give us something of his perspective, because he's got to be in theatre at 3 p.m. sharp, he says. So, Aman, tell us a little bit about your experiences.
Yeah, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, thank you very much for asking me to join, and apologies for my late arrival. I'm a practicing surgeon at Royal Papworth Hospital in Cambridge, and in fact, I've been in theatre, I've got myself tidied up, and I've come over to see you now. It's because of that, I haven't been here listening to what has already been said, but I did see a few slides go by. Our perspective it has been one of dramatic change, like everybody else's. It's been very exciting because the innovation block that we had experienced for as long as I can remember has been largely overcome. All the things that we used to hear, that you can't do this because it's insecure, it's unsafe, there's patient confidentiality, which we as practicing clinicians knew was complete nonsense, have just been overwhelmed. And the GMC said, providing you're sensible, I'm paraphrasing, of course, providing you're sensible and safe and take precautions, do what you want to communicate, to educate, to train. So we have that mandate. At Royal Papworth Hospital, which is a heart and lung hospital, what we have been doing is we've looked at lots of technology, but like everyone, we have the innovation hurdle to overcome. So what we have been using at the moment, while we're looking at specialized apps, is we've been using day-to-day apps to deliver education and training. And if you have got a couple of minutes, can I just run through that with a screen share?
Yeah, please.
Okay, let me just do that. So if you allow me to screen share, at this point, I always have to remember which screen I'm trying to share. And yeah, I think this is the one. Okay, so hopefully you can see a screen which says using everyday apps. Yeah. So actually what we found is to use what people are familiar with. And at the end of what I'm going to show you, I'll tell you what I think has made the difference. And I think within that, there is the lesson for all of us who are excited about this technology. Now, because the young people, and when I say young people, I mean students, doctors, young doctors, but in fact, all of us, what we want to use are things that we're familiar with. And nowadays, that's, in my scenario, it's WhatsApp, it's Zoom, it's Microsoft Teams. And I have been trying to do everything using that format. So what I'm just showing you there, let me just switch to the actual presentation. What I'm showing you there, are you still seeing it, by the way?
Yes, we are.
What you're clearly seeing there is a person wearing a headset, and this is an Oculus headset, but of course there are many other headsets around, and this could be done with a cardboard version, which costs a few pennies. In fact, several years ago, I invited Shafi Ahmed to talk at the Royal Society of Medicine, and within that, people were using cardboard 3D viewers, which did effectively the same as this, but not at such a high resolution. And we can do absolutely anything with these. They can be in the clinic, they can be in the operating room. And of course, there are wonderful programs around, detailed software programs. And this is the Oxford Medical Solutions program. I have no involvement in that other than to say it's a great program. And we have a young person there, a trainee, using the handheld devices in order to undertake a simulated interaction. And of course, the strength of the simulated interactions in a world where we've got unlimited content is actually the standardization and the measurement aspect. So you can then examine them people using a standardized formula. So we're using this, and this is just more of the same. In fact, it might be the same app running again. Now, where we've found this really interesting is in the operating theatre. And in that, we're in a process of continuous evolution. And we started off by broadcasting an operation from what you see on the screen that you're looking at. I do a lot of minimally invasive surgery as well as a lot of complex open surgery. But we started just by broadcasting what was on the screen. And the feedback we got was actually, that doesn't really tell me how to do the operation. So we're now starting to do a multi-channel feed. So this is a live Zoom broadcast from my theatre at ×2 speed to speed up for the purpose of this presentation. And what we're really trying to do is we're trying to bring in what I'm doing in these ports over here. This is a different part of the operation. And so what we are doing is we're integrating 3 or 4 channels. So you have the CT scan, which will be in one corner. You have this broadcast in detail in another corner. That's what we're seeing on the screen. But very importantly, we're bringing in an overhead camera so people can actually see what I'm doing through this little hole, because they don't know how to do this operation, which you see on this big 4K screen, unless you can see what's going on outside. And in that, we have live interactive feedback. And this has been absolutely fantastic. There are lovely applications around, such as Proximy, for example, which I think has made great strides, which provides a hardware-software solution. And I would encourage people to look at that. We're looking at that. It's fantastic. But actually, I am achieving this with Zoom, and people can come back to me with annotations on a screen and ask me in more detail about it. And I can use a very similar setup for online mentoring. And that allows us to disseminate this technology worldwide. The final thing that I'm going to say is that the way that we are doing this at Papworth is by engaging with all these young people. So I've always run a tutorial group for medical students. I trained in London as a senior trainee. I used to do it with the students from there. I'm in Cambridge now. Every week we get together and we have a 20-30 minute presentation on some part, some idea, some innovation, some technology, and it's student driven, it's student led, and then we chat about it. And from that very fertile interaction comes out all sorts of ideas and little projects. But what it really is doing is it's changing the culture. And my talk, which I've abbreviated dramatically, was from blue sky to everyday. All of these amazing technologies are going to become everyday, and how do we make them everyday? So it's student driven. And this final slide is up here. It's about AI. And the reason I've got this slide up here, it's the application of this is going to make the biggest difference as we start to develop and more VR and more augmented reality. Now, this is a little project that was started by Oxford Oxford students a year ago. They are now already a multi-million-pound company, and they are using AI to look at complex literature and summarize it. And applying that to the learning environment is going to be absolutely fantastic. So how do we bring blue sky to every day, capture the imagination of the young people and keep it simple? And then you can do it as a practicing clinician. So that's all I'd like to say. If you've got any questions, I can stay for a few minutes. I apologize, I'm so sorry, but I've got to cover for a colleague because of the COVID crisis. David, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. If you could stop your screen sharing now, we'll bring everybody back into the gallery view. Thank you very much. Anybody got any questions for Aman before he has to go? I know that Devi will probably have quite a bit to talk about AI later on, because she's had quite a long-standing involvement in that. And also Amin, who is with us. So you mentioned proximity, Aman. Well, Amin, that's one of the things that he's going to talk about in his presentation. So,
well, I'm glad that I haven't encroached too far on that. I could see there was a very talented group of speakers.
Yes, thanks very much for that, Aman. What I'd like to do now is probably just jump a little bit, and because proximity has been mentioned, and because Amin is in the same profession as Aman, I'd like to give him a chance to talk about proximity, and then we'll go back to Devi, and she can talk about some of their work, and we can have some of a panel discussion. So, Amin, are you ready to present and share your experience of proximity?
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. I can just share my screen. Let me see if I can do that. Okay. Thanks very much for inviting me for this forum. I've really enjoyed and learnt so much, actually, over the last hour with all the presentations. So really wanted to share our experience. I'm a colorectal surgeon and an interventional endoscopist at King's College Hospital in London. And during the lockdown, we had to obviously change the way we deliver education in much the same way that we've heard with the previous lecture. But I was very interested in the previous talks about how we can potentially improve some of this. And this is really about moving forward with training in one specific surgical technique. So I just wanted to quickly, in order to understand what this is required, I think you need to have a sort of a brief overview of what we're trying to teach. And this is a procedure which is called endoscopic submucosal dissection. It was been pioneered in Japan in the mid-1990s, and it's been done in the United Kingdom for the last decade, but only really getting increasing momentum in the last 4 to 5 years. And it's a specialist technique where we use natural orifice surgery, so not making any cuts through the abdomen, and use a flexible endoscope using a colonoscope and a very small 1.5 or a 2 millimeter knife. This is just to show you what this sort of looks like. In turn, this has been sped up, and this is just using very small instruments and using a flexible endoscope to make these cuts around in the bowel. And I'm just going to speed that up to show that actually that is the end result as what we would do, and this is the tumor that we would remove. So this has been endorsed by everybody. It's been endorsed by NICE, many years ago in 2010. By the European societies in 2015, by the American societies only last year, and obviously recent updates from Japan, but they pioneered this since the mid-1990s. And one of the issues is that in order to teach this, we need to have usually need to have an apprenticeship type model, because we need the surgeons to be present in theatre with us so that they can see not only what's on the screen in terms of the result, but also identify and learn the technical aspects of the surgery, because there is a lot of technical issues. And this is sort of some movements that might take place. You can see that you're using lots of different movements of the right and left hand in order to control the knife that you saw in the previous video. So there are some prerequisites, and we need to ensure that we can deliver that same training. And how do we do this remotely? We know that training can take up to 100 cases, and that's what's needed in order to achieve high quality and low complications. And so how do we achieve that? And we also know that within Europe is as you do more, your actual quality of the resection improves and the duration of time that you spent for the procedure reduces. So how do we traditionally do it? Well, traditionally, we always have people on the scene, and we have endoscopists that would come to us and they would observe and they would assist in 20 cases, and then we'd do live animal and lab workshops, and then we'd do supervised treatment and resection with a further 10 cases. And we published on this in the European Society about what that should look like. So how did they say that we should do things? This is a very traditional model of how we would teach the technique. It really, rather than bore you with the detail of this, the main take-home point from this slide is that it involves certainly some background endoscopy knowledge. It requires animal lab training, and it requires human experience with a mentor present on site. And that's what this traditional model actually needs. And what we can do then is then assign particular trainees by being with them to see whether they should actually complete this procedure themselves or complete part of it, and we can then take over. So doing this in a remote field, we need to identify cases that they should really be able to do themselves, because we won't be able to take over and support them if there is a particular problem during the procedure. So what did we do? We developed a program along with Pentax Medical, just called the Forward Program. And this is a program which is based on all the guidance. And really it takes in all the different guidance that I've talked about from the European societies. In addition to this, what we would do is we added the virtual case and online mentoring tools within the program. So in addition to doing the case observation, that now really can't happen as much within Europe, because this is the European program. We really have more online mentoring, and we have virtual case mentoring that goes on. So how did we do that in our particular field? And what we did really is we did similar to what we're doing now, is we hosted a whole load of webinars for the program, and we had 12 different trainees from 6 countries that were initially part of the pilot. And what we did is we did all of this virtually with webinars using the Proximi system and the Proximi software, and had these sessions that were released. So what we would do in the program is we would perform as a mentor the live procedures, and we would stream this to trainees, and they would be observing it and comment, and we would have an interaction with them. They would watch and learn, and also we can annotate the field to describe exactly what we're doing. Then what we would do is once they have done that and they've observed the number required in the program, they would perform the procedures from their own hospital, while we would be connected virtually to support them, and we could potentially annotate the screen and support them through difficult cases. So for example, during the actual mentoring session, it's a fairly simple process, because it's really all that's required is a laptop and the software program, and webcam and speaker and microphones. And then we would have a co-mentor that would join live with us. And then we would have a virtual classroom while the mentoring is going on, where we would have the other people in the program that would watch and discuss with the annotation tools while the trainee is performing the procedure, or while we are teaching them. And then once we've got this library of programs, this is a particular Proximi library that we would use, then we would have these that are actually saved on the program software, and we could go back and have review of these cases at any time scheduled, out of hours or in the evening or at weekends, and schedule this with the trainees so that we can review their particular performance and discuss the ways of how we can improve this. So here we are, some of the images from the live sessions. We can see that, while we're doing this, you can see that we can annotate in particular areas while we're doing the procedure. You can also point to it, and the trainees can have different techniques and tools that they can ask questions, and we can answer them either by annotating on the screen or by using a two-way interaction by audio and video.
Slowly cut. You can see what I'm doing. Inside to that side, in that manner there. Go back in. Don't try and do too much. In, back again.
So that's the sort of thing, that sort of nature. What we would do is show them where to cut, and then we would talk over it. And similarly, in terms of assessment of the lesion.
The lesion is about here, maybe. Maybe that's the edge. And this is, we've got a distance there. So we've got a reasonable margin all around, but really quite challenging because mucosa is thick, very thick.
So this
the lesion is about.
So in this manner, we can then go on to actually support trainees so they can produce specimens from their patients that are similar to this, and then we can evaluate this in detail with the pathologist. And often doing techniques such as this saves patients through natural orifice surgery, saves them to have quite major operations. So that mentoring platform that we've developed has helped certainly during the travel restrictions during the lockdown and COVID-19. So certainly, I think, in summary, I think in our practice, this technique is certainly increasing, but it's important to have a dedicated training program, and having the remote support with Proximi in collaboration with Pentax has meant that we can offer in an ongoing mentorship to 12 trainees in Europe during the lockdown period. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you very much, Amin. That was absolutely fascinating. One question that I have for you is about haptic technologies and whether haptic technologies and virtual reality will, as they become more commonplace, will they help with this kind of training?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the moment, certainly for the endoscopic world, in the laparoscopic world, we do have this sort of technologies that we have used before, particularly in the robotic space, where there's robotic simulation going on in surgery. But for the endoscopic training, this is something that has not really been developed in terms of identifying exactly what the actual torque and muscle memory and actual haptic feedback that you would get with the endoscope. And I think that's something that really needs to be developed in the future, because certainly at the moment, using this platform, it's really a crude way of doing it. It's the best way we can do remotely. But what's really needed is that sort of feedback to the trainee in the lab. But unfortunately, that's something that we need to really think about developing for the endoscopic world.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Amin? No? Okay, thank you very much, Amin. I'm now going to move on, and I'm going to ask Devi, because she's also involved with AI. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, Devi, could you give us your presentation?
Hi, everyone. I hope you can all see my screen now. Good afternoon, everyone. And firstly, thank you very much, David, for this opportunity. It was really insightful listening to the other speakers today. It was great to get a broad variety of applications that are going out there today. I'm Devi Kohli. I'm co-founder and CEO of AI Solve Limited and i3 Simulations, which is our new startup on healthcare. I'd like to talk about how we bringing or introducing adaptive VR simulations into transforming emergency healthcare training. And as part of that, before we get into specifics of sharing our case study to this purpose, I'd like to give a little bit of a background about who we are and our journey into healthcare, and give a slight overview around the technology landscape, and then go into one of our recent case studies and how we've scaled that in the healthcare space. Just diving into that, sorry, let me just put on the, slide mode there. So as I said, we are, i3 Simulations is a startup spun out of AI Sol, which is our parent company, and it's dedicated in providing interactive, immersive, and intelligent training simulations for healthcare, aviation, and business workplace training. For some of you who are not aware of who we AI Solve are, we are a 13-year-old company and based out of in the UK. We provide immersive, intelligent, and responsive virtual reality and mixed reality turnkey applications for retail, entertainment, training, and education. So the 13 years have been an interesting journey for us. Many of these early years we've spent in R&D, disrupting many service-based projects. And AI Solve today provides a strong R&D capabilities and infrastructure. And in this journey, we've not only managed to grow through this decade in introducing cutting-edge AI-driven AR, VR, MR applications into the market, we've also grown from a 3-member team to 55-member team that we are across the parent groups. Something interesting has happened in the last 4 years. We've having done a lot of that R&D around blending artificial intelligence into immersive applications. The ethos of our work has been very much about bringing responsive applications, intelligent and responsive applications to any end consumers, be that for retail, entertainment, or training education. It becomes so much more powerful when it comes to training applications. So we've started to productize some of that technology applications, and I must say we've been successful in this journey, where we've managed to achieve product and business exits in the scale of $500,000 to $30 million. And in fact, quite recent months, despite of the challenges around the pandemic, we at the group managed to close a substantial round of funding, around 10 million pounds, to fund our next set of product innovations within our product verticals. That said, i3 Simulations is where we're looking to scale up our healthcare training applications. And what I have here is I'd like to just spend a few moments talking about what the technology landscape has been. And I think this is something we all share and have an insight into, but it's always interesting to just kind of revisit where we are with that part of the landscape. So what I have here and what I really like to emphasize on is when we look back in the last few years, be the 2-3 years span of time, significant amount of investments and innovations have gone into the space of hardware and processing. I mean, thanks to all of those advancements, we today have hardware that is a fraction of the price to what it was a few years ago, and have phenomenal features, be that the head-mounted displays and or the smartphones that we have access to today. So thanks to that, what's also interesting to note is that the gap within that landscape is much more towards the content and the application space. And that, I think that's exactly where forums like these come to a great help. And that's where getting a peek and visibility into each other's work and how we're innovating in this space really comes to help. This, for instance, is an interesting point to just take a look at every now and then, and that's what I like to do, is as we know, human computation has evolved significantly from what it was for the mainframe computing to today, the wearable technology, be that the VR or the MR. And again, simply the interactions itself has moved a long way from the punch cards to today's touch interfaces, to the voice recognition and eye tracking, and even the brain sensing technologies. And this is where the world is today. And we are, I'm sure some of us are already using these technology advancements. Again, the evolution itself, I think that's exactly why a lot of us are talking about the power of VR, especially when it comes to training, is the fact that we as humans actually engage better with 3D and natural intuitive ways of content consumption, and as opposed to the simple two-dimensional consumption of content. When it comes to artificial intelligence, and it was very nice to hear the doctors speak about the power of it, because it is very true. Whether we're using artificial intelligence from a content point of view to bring the adaptiveness within our content applications, or we're using AI on the data point of view at the back end, to it is no doubt bringing transformational difference in the way we are gathering insights of our everyday world and how we're making sense of it. So I think all of these advancements in the whole broad scheme of technologies, it's not just any single technology in its isolation. I think what I like to really emphasize is how we have a duty to bring all of the different advancements within these technologies to integrate them and make a meaningful application for the purpose of healthcare training. So now coming to some of our case studies, I just thought, given the time limitations, I picked up one of our case study that's been very dear to us. I'd like to share how we believe that these technology advancements can transform healthcare training. So one of the things I really like to talk about is how medical errors and negligence have been 14th largest cause of death and injury across globally. Now that's something we all, I'm sure, agree that can be easily avoided through good quality training and preventive measures. Now, again, that also goes into saying that medical professionals have a serious concern around long hours that they have to contribute, especially in times like these where they're facing multiple challenges across health organizations, be that budget limitations or overcrowding. But again, these are by default the nature of the healthcare professionals. They are having to deal with really extreme pressures and chaotic pressure environments when dealing with emergency care. And this is where we believe that technologies like this can make a significant difference, because you can actually put them in these environments, help them build that kind of a muscle memory. And this is where we like to see AI come together with the immersive technologies, because let's bear this in mind, no two individuals will learn the same way. So if you're putting out a simulation that is more or less an enhanced version of a textbook that can be predictable over the second or the third or fourth use of the simulation, it's not really serving the purpose as it would in the real world. So this is where we would love to see the use of AI come to play, where the gameplay starts to be more adaptive in the engagement to the end user. Now, this image here is again a very powerful one. I love sharing this time and time again, is because all of this has just literally happened in the last 5 decades. So that is very powerful. I mean, the question for us is, when you look at the speed at which technology is advancing, the question then is, are we advancing with that speed? Are we adapting with that speed? And again, that's exactly where the case study I'd like to share today come to play. So resuscitation VR is one of the projects we have worked with Children's Hospital LA, piloted at the Children's Hospital LA, was kindly sponsored and funded by Facebook under their VR for Good program. But the interesting part about this particular program that we have deployed as a pilot in CHLA is to create this reliable, realistic and safe training environment for medical professionals to train on, low frequency, high stakes situations, especially when it comes to critical decision making during high stress care environments. What we enjoyed working and deploying this program here with a CHLA team of experts was the fact that they have conducted a full-length study, quantitative and qualitative study around this program. And the results were very promising and positive, which then got published into medical journals. And that has then enabled us to actually scale the program over and beyond the pilot. Now, what caused that success for that pilot? And I think that's really important to understand. Where we take pride and where we love to see more and more innovations going in is actually towards creating non-linear and intuitive learning environments. We'd love to blend AI into much more depths than we are able to do today. The gameplay is something we really want to take it to what it's like in real world. And again, some of the visuals that I have seen with what Xavier has shared earlier, that's exactly where we need to start heading to. Again, intelligent real-time analytics, it's so essential for us to have that kind of a real-time visibility and measurable picture in front of the user, both for the user as well as the training departments, content management systems for the administrators to take advantage of. Now, some of these points have really helped us ensure the pilot have stabilized really well within the medical professionals and give them the results that they're looking for, that have enabled us to penetrate a initial rollout into the 11 hospitals and institutes for a pilot within the USA. That said, that then led to a far more scalability to that program. So my team that's working very hard behind the scenes at i3 Simulations, they're really committed to the costs and the benefits of what the XR training can do for healthcare. So not just we have managed to trial this program at Children's Hospital LA and the 11 hospitals that followed, it has now scaled to 70 global hospitals worldwide. And some of them are very actively using the software and the training solution. We have managed to partner with some of the best leading industry players within this healthcare space. We've now taken this into Singapore with the support of Ministry of Health Singapore, and expanding the training offering into other emergency care, including cardiac emergency. So yes, I think it's very essential for companies like us sharing this platform to continue to do that innovation, not just in one space, but actually look at the broader broader horizon around that landscape of technology advancements and bring them into meaningful applications. So all I'd like to share as a summary note is it's very important for our market and the consumers of these technologies to understand the appropriate hardware. As we were talking earlier, the doctor was mentioning about cardboard VR. There's the 360 videos. And then we have the full-scale interactive gameplays that are much more appropriate to use around the head-mounted displays with higher resolutions. So it's very essential for us to work in collaboration and ensure we're educating not just ourselves, but also helping through that education to our customers to choose the right appropriate hardware for the application they want to use. Embed most of these applications across the curriculum, course curriculum, whether that's right at the institutional level and or the organizational level, very essential to ensure they're seamlessly blended into their course curriculum or training programs. Gather the information. Again, healthcare is a sector that's very much evidence-led. The primary duty for us is to ensure not just building the technology or a pilot in isolation, it is really building that kind of a broader, long-term picture, and to ensure you're working with the right academic partners, right market partners, to ensure you are building this evidence that's essential for the future. And who is it for? Again, there are so many varieties of content out there across the landscape of XR. I think very critical for us to ensure we understand who we are targeting and what kind of application is suitable for the use case. And finally, get involved. I think, again, that's exactly where forums like these come to immense help. And try the demos that are out there, share the case studies. It's not a closed group. It is actually an ecosystem. Now, I'd like to end that to say that we also had fun while building these serious programs. And it has been tremendous fun through this journey of building AI Solve and i3 simulation that it is today. So I thank you with my details there if any of you would like to be in touch.
Thank you very much for that, Debbie. If you stop sharing your screen. Has anybody got any questions for Debbie? I'd like to ask you a quick question, Debbie. The role of AI within VR, what does the contribution of AI make to add value to VR? How is it applied?
It's a very interesting question there, David, because to be honest, AI, the use of AI within the applications is still very, very embryonic, I must say. Again, AI is not essential to be used in every single healthcare training application because it can be an overkill and overuse in some cases. Like for instance, in most surgical training, it's the speed at which you're learning, the scale at which you're putting that content applications out there. 360 video could do an amazing job, and interactive videos could be a great use cases. But when it comes to AI at the moment, we are using to bring adaptive gameplay in some of those high-end immersive interactive applications. And also using that on the back end for the analytics, intelligent analytics, so it can give the predictive performance analysis as well. And currently my team has upgraded some of our content applications in pediatric resuscitation by using NLP, natural language processing, and giving that voice recognition interaction into our programs. So I think we're just working and learning along. And I think this is where data sampling comes to help. And we need that large scale groups to come together.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anybody have a question for Debbie? No? Okay. Thank you, Debbie. Well, I'm nice to see Claudia here with us. She's going to be talking to us with her team in a little while. Before that, though, it's time for me to introduce Tim. Is it Maori or Maori? Maori or Maori?
Maori it is, yes. I get Maori a lot, but it's Maori.
Okay. Tim Maori, I'm going to ask Tim now to take the spotlight and tell us about his work at Johnson & Johnson, maybe reflect on some of the things that you've seen.
Sure thing. Thanks so much. I trust everyone is seeing my screen at this point.
Yes.
Terrific. Well, what a pleasure, first of all, just to be here and to share this this virtual stage with such an interesting and diverse panel. So thanks so much for the opportunity. I've titled my talk, How Our 134-Year-Old Startup is Scaling VR Surgical Training. And of course, the 134-year-old startup line is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. We are definitely not a startup. I think everyone recognizes that. We have quite a long and proud history at Johnson & Johnson, but we do challenge ourselves to try and act like one. So I know everyone is already very familiar with J&J, but you might not know the Johnson & Johnson Institute. So let me just provide you with a little bit of context about who we are and what I do within the Institute. And then I'll share with you a bit about our experience building and now scaling our virtual reality surgical training platform, and share a few lessons, I think, or principles that we've learned along the way as well. So the J&J Institute is a division within our medical devices sector, responsible for reaching and training all of the healthcare professionals around the globe who use our products in operating theaters every day. So traditionally that has been at brick and mortar training institutes that we run, but increasingly we're leaning more and more into digital and online education. And my role within the Institute is I lead a small team, a small but mighty team, I like to say, called the Technology and Innovation Group. And we work with all of the different education teams across the med device sector. And we help those teams begin to integrate new and emerging technology into their training curricula for healthcare professionals. And I'm not just saying it because this particular talk track is around VR. I'm saying it because it's true. Our largest and probably most powerful project that we manage today is our VR surgical training platform. And the work we're doing there, I think, is really important, not just because of the pandemic that we're experiencing that's preventing us from doing our traditional kind of in-person hands-on training, but even pre-pandemic, I think this work was really important because, the environment that our customers are operating in, are working in, I think has changed dramatically over the last several years. Surgery itself is becoming more complex. Procedures are more complex. The products that we produce are more sophisticated than ever. And that means that surgeons and OR teams need more training than they used to before they can safely adopt these new devices. It used to be that we could bring a surgeon to, a sort of transactional one-day in-person course, teach them pretty effectively how to use our products, and then set them on their way. And that really is less and less true today. And so we need to provide more training opportunities to surgeons so that they can get more comfortable with the products. At the same time, though, like even us non-surgeons, the time available to devote to training is just decreasing. Demands on a surgeon's both professional and personal lives, I think, are more now than probably at any time before. Administrative burden, family obligations, what have you. And so there's just less time available to train. And so you're trying to squeeze, it's like this really difficult spot of having more to learn, but less time to do it. And then on top of that, and this is not really a new problem, but I think one that we're just maybe more attuned to as we've gotten better at education. And that's this notion that if you want to improve at something, you need pretty immediate feedback on your performance in order to do that. Without feedback, you don't really know where you are on your learning curve, and you don't really know what gaps you might have or where you need to make improvements. And in the world of surgery, objective feedback on performance is hard to come by. And it's these kind of three problems. There are probably more that I could go into, but it's really these three problems, I think, that got us so excited about virtual reality and its potential use for surgical training. Rather than bringing someone into a cadaver lab that is only a one-time single use, you can use VR over and over again. So that notion of needing more training, I think, is solved there. As I'll show you in a moment, the form factor and the evolution of VR is just now conducive to that notion of anytime, anywhere training. So that it is really able to fit into busy slots for our trainees, our surgeons. And then really importantly, and I'm sure Justin will talk about this during his talk as well, the ability to actually score somebody's performance in VR and give them feedback on it is just really meaningful and helps them to improve. And so, we've been on this journey now for a few years, and I'll just quickly kind of walk you through what that has looked like. You can see on the left side of the screen, this is when we got our start. And we started with, you can see the headset here, obviously tethered to the laptop, and then these had outside-in trackers. it was a nice system, and we had a nice little library of surgical procedures that we created. Pretty awesome experience when we put surgeons into it. They all raved about it. These systems were awesome in 2017. They're still awesome today, and we have dozens of these kind of circulating around the globe and being used still today with customers. But that was really where we got our start in VR, and where we knew there was a real there in terms of its value. A really big milestone was reached when a surgeon and researcher from Imperial College London, Kartik Lajasetti, actually initiated a study where he looked actually at the content we had created for total hip arthroplasty, and basically took surgical trainees and split them into two groups, randomized them into two groups. One group that got access to a VR headset and could use it for a period of a few weeks, and the other group that was what we'll call traditionally trained. So they were reading textbook chapters, they were watching surgical videos, they're observing surgery. And then both groups went into a lab and were asked to complete a total hip arthroplasty on a cadaver, and were rated by more senior surgeons who were blinded as to which group each participant had been put into. And they were rated on their performance. And as you can see on the screen here, the results were pretty amazing. 83% of the VR trained surgeons were able to do that procedure with minimal or no guidance, whereas none of the non-VR trained surgeons were able to accomplish the same. And maybe even more powerful, I think, is that even the lowest rated of the VR trained surgeons performed better than the best of the non-VR trained surgeons. This was incredibly validating data for us, not only to convince perhaps end users, surgeons, that it's worth their while to put on a VR headset and try it out, but it also helped us to, quite frankly, to convince some stakeholders, even internal to J&J, and to really get the fuel that we needed to really take this platform to the next level. And that's kind of what you see in the image here underneath 2020, where you can see you've got an end user there practicing in VR using an Oculus Quest. I actually need to update this picture because we've now moved to the Oculus Quest 2. But now we're untethered, and we're working with a new developer, Osu Vr, who I know you'll be hearing about more, so I won't tell you a ton about them. But we really, have gone from a few dozen of the 2017, sort of what we call our 1.0 version, to now hundreds of these headsets that we're now deploying globally, and I think, even quickly scaling from there. So making quite an impact. I'll show you just a very, very short clip of what it looks like. I hate showing VR video clips because I find that it never does it justice. As you all probably all know, you need to sort of put the headset on and see it yourself. But this is just a portion from one of the procedures that our development partner, Osu Vr, has created for us. And it's incredibly, incredibly lifelike. So with all of that said, I'll close by just giving you a few lessons I think that we've learned along the way, or principles that we've kept in mind. And I think these apply not only to VR, but kind of any new tech initiative that you might embark upon. So first is fall in love with the problem, not the solution. You'll find, or I've certainly found, that when people put on a VR headset or really any new technology, they get really excited about it. And then it becomes a solution, and it has the danger of becoming a solution in search of a problem. If you're going to embark on this, if you're going to try and start building something, start with a problem that you know that you want to solve, and then work toward that. And the other thing I'd say, sort of related to that, is in the case of VR, it's not really just about what we can do when we're in that VR experience or in the headset. It's what are you trying to enable people to do after they've used VR. So in our case, you heard us talk about, we're trying to improve surgeons' performance, build something toward that. So whatever your use case is, think about what you're trying to empower your users or your learners to do and build toward that. The other one that I have to remind not only myself, but some of my internal team members as well is yes, think big, but start small. And if you find yourself saying, either out loud to a colleague or even inside your own head, if you start saying things that start with the phrase, hey, wouldn't it be amazing if we, I'm not saying to abandon those ideas, but maybe put them on off to the side and put them on a roadmap. start with something achievable. I often come back to one of my favorite quotes, which is known as Gall's Law. A complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that worked. And so it would be amazing, yes, if we had the ability to upload patient-specific anatomy and, you know, train in VR on that. It would be amazing if I could take the data from, you know, the end user's performance in VR, merge that with some other data set and provide recommendations on what other training experience we should provide. And one day we'll get to all those things, but trying to design and run that all from scratch, you're sort of bound for failure. So my advice to anyone is think about sort of tightening your scope and building something simple that works. And then the last thing I'll say is to keep in mind that success is a team sport. And when I say that, you probably think that what I mean is that, you know, within J&J, we need to assemble a good team to sort of build this out. And that certainly is true. But I would even suggest that think of your team as extending beyond the walls of your organization or your company. And really, there are sort of three different players in really any industry that's now being reshaped by digital. There's always the sort of the industry incumbents. So in the healthcare space, you know, a company like Johnson & Johnson. And historically, I used to only sort of think about what were my peers in this space, the Medtronics, the Strykers of the world doing. I didn't have to worry about much else. But as digital is reshaping literally every industry, you've got to sort of also look left and right at what are these smaller kind of tech startups doing, and then what are the digital giants doing. When I say digital giants, these are obviously companies that began as startups but are now running much of the world. These are your Apples, your Amazons, your Googles, your Facebooks, your Microsofts, and the like. They're creeping into every industry, healthcare included. And that can be very threatening for an industry incumbent like ourselves, or it can be tremendously exciting. And we've chosen to take the exciting view. And if you can find companies, startups or digital giants alike, that are you know, aligned to your mission, their company cultures might be different, but their mission is aligned to yours. What we found is that you can accomplish things that you would never be able to do alone. And so for us, you've heard me reference it a few times already. You know, we're using the Oculus for Business platform. That's allowing us to scale our VR training platform faster than we could ever have hoped to have done alone. And then our development partner, Osu Vr, you know, is just able to move quickly and challenge us to really rethink the way we do our VR surgical training. And so, you know, we have meetings with both of these companies, you know, together, and we really operate as one team. Has it been completely smooth sailing? I can't say that it has, right? Like each company has its own culture and you've got to sort of work through that. But on the whole, I think it's been tremendously productive. And I'm not saying, you know, that you've got to partner with Oculus or that you've got to partner with Osu, although our experience has been good. What I am saying is, you know, think about how to align yourself with partners that can help you, you know, really take what you're trying to do to that next level. So those are just a few of the things that we've learned along the way. So just to kind of quickly wrap up, really focus on your problem, start with, you know, think big, but start small, and then surround yourself with a great team. And so with that, I'll just say thank you very much for the opportunity, and my contact info you see there is below if anyone has any other questions or would like to learn a little bit more. Thanks so much, David.
Thank you very much, Tim. You're on screen now. Does anybody have any questions for Tim before we move on to the next session? There are some questions in the Q&A that I can maybe put. Does anybody just want to ask Tim something first? No? Okay. Well, maybe you can answer this from David Crookall. He's asked, he'd love to know what kinds of debriefing you use for training sessions. Does the type of debriefing vary with the type of technology that you use with debriefing?
I'm going to make an assumption that by debriefing, we're talking about running a training session and then having a debriefing session with the user immediately following.
Yes.
Yeah. I'd say one of the great things about the platform we're running now on with Osu is that you're getting performance feedback right away. So as soon as you finish your run through VR, you can actually look and see how did you do. And so it makes those debriefing conversations much easier, because if you're working with, you know, with a surgical coach or mentor, and they can look at your score as well, then yes, you can have a really rich conversation around, you know, which steps of a procedure were you getting hung up on that were taking you longer, or where you had to sort of ask the system for hints. So I would say, yes, a debriefing conversation is super important. It gets back to that notion of needing, you know, performance feedback in order to improve your performance. So to summarize, I'd say, you know, some of that feedback is coming sort of automated through the system. And then, yes, it's always augmented, that human to human connection and helping make sense of your data, I think is super important as well.
Okay, so your debriefing, there's a follow-up question. Is it primarily oral, or is it verbal, or is it just going through analytics with the learner?
Generally, it's a conversation between whoever's facilitating that experience, be it a J&J educator or a surgeon faculty member, and it's a conversation. And those happen, you know, we can do that after a virtual reality run. We also have surgeons who meet up and just share their own surgical videos with one another and debrief with one another. So there are a number of ways that happens.
Okay.
I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions of Tim before we move on to the next session? I want to have a general panel discussion after this final session with Claudia. So maybe we can save those questions till later. Okay, Claudia, now over to you. I'm going to give you center screen. And I have the first video that you wanted to show lined up. So if you want to go through the process that we practiced last week, we'll see if it still works. Okay.
Thank you, David. First of all, I'd like to make sure we have our 4 panelists on the call. Already, I see Justin. I see Jacob. I'm going to introduce everyone in a minute, but do we also have... We have all 4? We have Jack and Ryan?
Yep. Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. Okay. Sorry, I can't see everyone. Thank you. All right. Well, I'll just do a brief introduction, and then David, we can start by playing some of the videos we'd like to share and get into our panel discussion. Okay. So first of all, just quickly as a matter of introduction of myself, I'm Claudia Backus. At Facebook Reality Labs, I lead enterprise and productivity partnerships. And this means that my team works with enterprise developers and ISVs, or independent software vendors, to bring VR solutions to businesses, companies, enterprises around the world. And so now I'd like to introduce our 4 panelists. And so what I'll do is I'm going to introduce each one of them, and we'd love to share with you a short video about their companies to give you more context and background about for our discussion. So I'll start with Justin Barrett, who is the CEO of Osu Vr. He's a former amateur game developer turned Harvard-trained orthopedic surgeon. And if you could hold on, David, sorry to play the video.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I know you're teeing it up.
I jumped the gun.
That's okay. So again, on Justin's introduction, based on the challenges that he was seeing on how we currently train surgeons and other healthcare professionals, he co-founded the surgical training platform, Osu Vr. So now I would love to just have you watch a short video segment about Osu Vr. David, I'm going to hand it over to you. And hope that it works this time. We have no audio.
Oh, just hold on.
If you click that little mute button in the lower left corner in YouTube, that should give you audio.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
When you click share screen in Zoom, there's a box you have to check to share audio as well. Mm-hmm. So it might be worth resharing your screen, David. Yeah, but at least this has subtitles, so.
David, do you think you can fix the audio before the next video?
Sorry, can you not hear the audio?
No.
No,
We have not
yeah,
heard the
I think when
audio.
you share the screen, you need to select to share your computer
okay.
audio as well.
If you don't mind, I will try again, and I will share the computer sound. I apologise for that. So, and I'll go back to the beginning of the video. Just bear with me a second.
Thank you.
It's a long road to become a surgeon, and there's too much to learn, so you're being spread too thin. It takes about 50 to 100 procedures to achieve basic proficiency. You're relying on random chance to get exposure to those surgeries. With virtual reality, you go from having one tibia to infinite tibias, right? You can get those reps in. You can use it anytime, anywhere. You can train on any procedure. You can train as a team and train remotely. With Osu Vr, our mission is to improve patient outcomes and make providers' lives better. It's not replacing real-world experience, but it's enough to get you much further along the learning curve so that when you walk into the operating room, you feel very confident and you know exactly what to do. The Oculus team is so excited and supportive of the work we're trying to do in the world. I can feel it, and it is highly motivating. You can create technology that can impact the lives of billions of patients all around the world. Virtual reality and the Oculus Quest is one of those technologies.
Okay, thank you, David. So now with that, I would love to just have us hear from Justin directly, so he can tell us more about his story and how he became involved in VR technology. Justin?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Claudia. Thank you, David, and great presentation, Tim. I thought there were some incredible points there. I'm just going to dive right in. I know we're a bit short on time. So a little bit, once again, thanks for the introduction, Claudia, about my background. I started out in life as an amateur game developer. When a family member got ill, it got me interested in how to use software and technology to not necessarily entertain people, but to help them, and pivoted from computer science to biomedical engineering with the goal to invent healthcare technology. But I didn't know how to get started with invention, so I was seeking advice from a mentor who told me, if you want to invent something, you need to understand the problem you're trying to solve first. And he thought that the best way to understand medical problems was to be a doctor. So that led to me attending med school at UCLA, subsequently my orthopedic surgery residency there. I did a fellowship in pediatric orthopedics at Harvard, and then a medical innovation fellowship at Stanford's biodesign program. And it was really during my training that I discovered this problem firsthand, which is how we train and assess our healthcare providers with their technical skills. So I want to talk briefly with you all today a little bit about Osu as a company, really dive into the problem we're trying to solve, a lot like Tim was talking about, fall in love with problems, not solutions. It's definitely what happened to me. And if anyone wants to hear the full story, it goes on for quite a bit. It's been an incredible journey to get here. I want to give an overview of the technology and then spend most of the presentation talking, expanding further on, Tim was talking about some validation research and some of the validation research we've done with the platform. And then answer any questions and hear from the other incredible panelists. Part of the reason why I was attracted to pediatric orthopedics is the mission-driven nature of helping children. I really found that to be highly motivating and focusing, and I wanted to bring that same sort of passion and energy to Osu Vr. So I want to share our mission with you all, which is to improve patient outcomes with better education and assessment, increase the adoption of higher value medical technologies, and democratizing access to surgical training all around the world. Osu Vr is home to over 60 employees. We have incredible team members, including our VP of Product, Anu Kirk, who's the former general manager of all of Sony PlayStation VR, who took PlayStation VR from a concept to one of the world's most successful consumer VR headsets. We also have Jonathan Sabella on our team, who's famous for having supervised the first team to win an Oscar for their work in VR for a VR film, and I'm going to show you some of their work a bit later. We're also home to the world's largest medical illustration team, and this incredible team in terms of size and talent and scale is really in thanks to our backing, which is Kaiser Permanente Ventures. We've raised over $17 million in venture capital from top healthcare healthcare venture capitalists, which allows us not only bring quality to the table, but scale. So what is the problem we're actually trying to solve? So there are really three dynamics, and then the fourth dynamic, of course, is COVID. The first dynamic is there's just too much to learn. So Tim was talking about this a bit, that we're victims of our own success in a way. Accelerating science and technology has massively expanded the library of procedures healthcare professionals are expected to know how to do at a moment's notice. For example, one time I was eating lunch and I was called urgently to the zoo to operate on a gorilla, which I was vastly underprepared for. It was very exciting, but an extreme example, but every surgeon or physician never knows what's going to come in the door on any given day. The second part of the problem, once again, what Tim was alluding to, is the increasing complexity of the procedures that we perform. So learning curves are getting longer. They're going from 10 to 20 to 50 to 100 cases to reach proficiency. The third part of the problem is that there's really no good way to assess technical skill in healthcare. The only time I've been assessed, I was interviewing for a program and they had me play the board game Operation, which is a true story. Then, of course, there's COVID, which we're all too familiar with, which makes it very difficult to train the main way that we train, which is with patients or at large-scale conferences and courses. And the picture on the left, a friend of mine took that picture during their residency. It's an instruction manual folded out on the patient while they're operating, which highlights sort of the extreme nature of the problem. So I was able to encounter VR very early with the Oculus DK1 because of my gaming background, immediately saw its ability to solve this problem, as many of you are taking different angles with. For technical training, it allows you to use your hands in a realistic way. It allows you to simulate any procedure. You can use it anytime, anywhere. You can train as a team, train remotely, and get objective assessment. So I want to show you what Osu Vr looks like in practice to just show a few key things here. So obviously everybody in this conference has tried virtual reality, and probably most of the people watching this video have tried virtual reality as well. But when it comes to technical training in healthcare, when people see or try Osu Vr, they're like, wow, this is quite different from what I've experienced before. And part of it is bringing techniques from leading movie studios like Industrial Light and Magic and Marvel, and gaming studios like Electronic Arts, Apple, Microsoft, to surgical simulation to create a level of fidelity that really hasn't been accomplished before. You can see the individual pores in this patient's skin, not only an incredible level of visual fidelity, but running on Oculus Quest and Oculus Quest 2 standalone VR. So that's really what is the technical accomplishment here, which is taking techniques from games like Vader Immortal and bringing it to surgical simulation so that we can benefit from it as healthcare providers and our patients ultimately can benefit from it. What also we're demonstrating here is the ability to train collaboratively. So the avatar you see here in the surgeon spot, that's me in LA, and I'm practicing with our VP of sales, Dave, who's in New York. We're operating in the same room. You could be across the world, around the country. And not only are we operating together, but it's how these sessions are scheduled and take place that Osu Vr makes very reliable and user-friendly and easy to set up so that we can continue to train despite the physical restrictions we're currently under. And I know most of the people in this conference have tried collaborative training. Tim and I jumped into VR once, and the first thing that Tim said to me was that, wow, I haven't been with another person in the same room in weeks. This was like during peak lockdown. And I thought that was really fascinating because we weren't physically together in the same room, but that just kind of slipped out of his mouth. And it's just really the power of connection with virtual reality and technology like the Oculus Quest and Quest 2. Osu Vr not only brings quality to the table, but scale. So we're home to the world's largest VR surgical training library that's expanding at a tremendous rate. So I want to end the talk briefly talking about the validation research behind what we do. So the first study I want to talk about was performed independently at UCLA, where they were trying to understand how VR compares with overall skill transfer compared to traditional training. So traditional training would be lecture, technique guide, illustration, and list of steps. So the individual you see on the right was trained with Osu Vr to a set level of proficiency, while the individual you see on the left was trained traditionally. So you'll see the individual on the right gets a congratulatory handshake, great job, buddy, strong work. And on the left, you'll see that the individual is kind of checking this piece of paper a number of times. So that's a cheat sheet. It's a list of steps you can check if you need to. He actually checks this sheet 26 times in this run through, while on the right, the Osu Vr trained and assessed individual checks it 0 times. And that's really what objective assessment gives you. The individual on the left was allowed to take as much time as he needed to prepare and came in when he felt ready. The individual on the right came in when he was objectively measured to be ready. And it shows you that how we feel and what reality is often are quite different. And right now in healthcare, we are really driven by feelings and intuition when we're making decisions to bring new procedures or procedures we haven't performed in some time to patients. And you can see what a difference that is. So 20 trainees, half were trained with VR, half were trained traditionally. In every single assessment category of something called OSATs, or the Objective Structured Assessment of Technical Skill, the Osu Vr trained and assessed individual performed significantly better for a net improvement of 10 points or 230%. And this was published in the Journal of Surgical Education early this year. We had our second level 1 randomized clinical trial published in a top 5 orthopedic journal called Core, which looked at a trainee's ability to perform a procedure without supervision. What that showed that with traditional training, 25% of the participants were able to perform a procedure without supervision. But when trained and assessed with the Osu Vr, that went up to 78%, so a 306% improvement. We also had what I believe to date is the world's largest VR validation study with 38 participants. Not 100% sure of that, but once again, this was performed at a hospital in California. Every single metric was significantly better when using Osu Vr training and assessment. A study performed at Wake Forest looking at the enjoyability and kind of how people feel about VR, because I think sometimes it's easy to get sort of excited about the technology and it's effective, but if people don't enjoy learning this way, they're not going to use it. Engagement is a critical aspect of any digital learning modality, and this study showed that 100% of the residents at Wake Forest found Osu Vr to be effective, would recommend it to their peers, and found it to be enjoyable and intuitive as well. So just scratching the surface, I know we don't have a lot of time here, but I am tremendously excited about all the work everybody is working on in this space. I think the take-home point that I would say is really just echoing Tim's talk is really focus on the problem you're trying to solve, and then understand what is your goal? Like, what are the metrics or the KPIs that you're trying to impact? And then are you actually impacting those with your solution, and measure them scientifically to ensure that what you're doing is working? I think it's an incredibly exciting space right now, both VR and across sort of the technological spectrum with mobile AR, holographic headset displays, and it's often easy to get lost in all of the options and lose sight of the problem you're trying to solve at the end of the day. So really doubling down on what Tim said, really understanding the problem, the KPIs, and making sure that you have the impact that you set out to perform to begin with is kind of what I'd love for you all to take home. But thank you again for David for the opportunity to present, and Claudia, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panelists.
Thank you, Justin. So I'm going to move fast in interest of time to try and make sure we can cover all of our panelists and introductions. So next I'd like to introduce Ryan. Ryan is the founder and CEO of SimX, a VR medical simulation company targeting physician, nursing, and EMS training. He's also a practicing emergency physician at Stanford University Hospital, assistant professor at Stanford Medical School, former board member of the American Medical Association, has worked for CMS, the FDA, and Google. And with that, I think we'd love to just share the video. Hopefully the audio will work this time, and then hand it over to Ryan to tell you more about himself and his company.
150,000 people are killed by medical errors. It's the third leading cause of death. It's a big job, but that's what we're here to fix. I used to work for CMS, for AHRQ, building packages of metrics to make care safer, but what I realized is that that's not really where the power is. The airline industry learned a long time ago that the power is in simulation, in practicing your skills in a safe environment. And SimX is making simulation cheaper, easier, and more effective for the healthcare industry. And that's all possible because of VR. With SimX, your patient can be a baby or a grandmother. They can be vomiting or missing limbs. With over 30 environments and growing, you can perform simulations outside next to a burning car or on the top of Everest. There's no drop-down menus or points to get. You treat virtual patients just like you would patients in real life. If you want to talk to your patient, you just talk to them. If you want to listen with a stethoscope, you walk over to where it is, you pick it up, and you put it on their chest. But the real power is in how easy it is. With these all-in-one headsets, you can set it up in less than 5 minutes. That means you can lecture in the front of the room and sim in the back. You can make it part of small group sessions. You can send headsets home with your students, and they can join via the internet and work together around the same virtual patients. And you can do all this for less than 1/10 the cost of traditional mannequin simulation. In fact, you can sign up for free today. You know, every generation of medicine looks back on the one before and says, how could you have thought that this was a good idea? And I'm convinced that the future will look back on us and say, how could you have practiced on real patients? It's absurd. It's barbaric, frankly. This is the future of medical training, but for over 150 institutions across the world, including University of Pennsylvania, Northwestern, the US Air Force, who are using SimX on a regular basis, it's not the future, it's the present. You can go to simxvr.com today, sign up to be part of the solution, to work with us to help make care safer.
Thank you. Ryan, I'd love to ask you the same question I asked Justin. Tell us more about how you became involved in VR technology and how, whether this path, you chose this path or whether it chose you.
Yes, it's not letting me unmute. Oh, there we go. All right, can you hear me all right? Excellent. So I'm going to be quick in the interest of time. I think the video introduced a lot about myself and the company. I think as far as how I came into VR, I kind of backed into it from not necessarily from the technology side, but from the quality improvement and patient safety side. Now, I guess to be fair, I was a computer science major and then switched to business in undergrad before I even realized I wanted to go to medical school. So I entered knowing that I wanted to work to solve systems problems, but I did that initially through policy and through research. I worked for CMS, which is the US agency that oversees Medicare and Medicaid. I was on the board of trustees of the American Medical Association, did a lot of work developing packages of metrics to make care safer. And then as I transitioned into the educational world here at Stanford, I realized that simulation training is really one of the most powerful tools that we have to affect the quality of care and the safety of the care that we provide in the healthcare industry. But of course, I think as many of you are aware, the traditional tools for simulation, mannequins that can shake a little bit to tell you that they're seizing. They might have little lights in their lips to tell you that maybe they're cyanotic. They're really limited in what they can portray, and they're ludicrously expensive. And that's where I think my tech background kicked in, and I realized there was an opportunity here with VR. So we started building this back in 2013, filed for some initial patents back then, way before the technology was mature enough, I think, to be a viable commercial product. Launched it a couple of years ago and have seen tremendous growth. We went from something like 6 or 7 employees last year to 25. We went from 20-ish institutions using it last year to now over 160 and a few more every week hopping on board. We got over 150 scenarios that we've developed and are developing 5 or 6 more every single week going forward, which has been very exciting. And then looking forward to launching a big case series with Osu Vr coming up here in January, 100-case curriculum for nursing education. So it's been quite an exciting journey, and looking forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists and getting to your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Ryan. Okay, next I would love to introduce Dr. Jack Pottle. Jack is an acute and emergency medical doctor and founder and chief medical officer of Oxford Medical Simulation. He has a psychology degree, has worked as a healthcare assistant, studied medicine at Oxford, spent 5 years as a medic in the NHS, and has set up diabetic clinics in South Africa, and now trains clinicians around the world with VR simulation at Oxford Medical Simulation. So we would love to maybe play a brief video that he shared with us, and then we can hand it over to you, Jack, to tell us more. Thank you. Jack, I'm going to quickly hand it over to you to tell us more.
Perfect. Thank you, Claudia. That was a very brief trailer video, so I will give a little bit of background about me and the company. But again, I will crack through this hopefully so we can get the questions at the end. So as Claudia mentioned, my background was in psychology. I then worked in nursing for a couple of years as a healthcare assistant and then became a doctor in acute and emergency medicine in the UK. And I think relating to the problems that people have been saying is, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And for me, it was that experience of working in all of these different areas, and I worked abroad quite extensively, seeing the same problems, no matter where you are, this sense of people making mistakes and not having enough practice to be able to improve patient care. It is the same issue that everyone is talking about. And so it's the question then of, how do you do that? How do you give that experience? How do you scale it? And I initially ran a free open access non-profit platform called Oxford Medical Education. That was with the Oxford Medical School faculty, and became a simulation instructor. So using mannequins, using actors, and was thinking, this is clearly the best way of training, but how do you take that and how do you scale that? How do you get that training, make it more realistic, get it to more people, and be able to assess their performance as you're going through that? And so that was 4 years ago now, feeling old, and that was the creation of Oxford Medical Simulations. So we looked at, VR, AR, MR, best way of doing this. And in terms of scale, it was always VR as the Oculus was coming out. And so we developed that platform, built up the team, and we are now delivering the OMS platform to hundreds of institutions around the world. So we work predominantly in the US, but also widely across the UK and globally as well. And that platform really is focused on delivering the scenarios that you saw there. It is about delivering it in a way that suits the institution that we're working with. And we work with hospitals, we work with universities, we work with healthcare systems across medicine, nursing, OT, PT, lots of different areas and fields. And we deliver that in a way that works for the institution. So some scenarios are single player, one person in a headset, or on screen, and we do on screen and in virtual reality to let people build up their skills over time, to be able to do it at home, get their skills up to scratch, then come into virtual reality, get that immersive experience, learn from practice, and then go into the real world. But it's in single player, so that psychological safety, ability to get to mastery on your own, ability to look at all of your analytics and be able to make sure you can improve over time. But equally, that ability to do interprofessional, multiplayer scenarios. So you have lots of different people in that same scenario, up to 30 people in the same scenario, learning from each other, speaking to the patient, and then going and debriefing afterwards, and doing that either asynchronously or doing it immediately after the scenario. And that is what is exciting about this, is seeing everyone learning together and doing a structured debrief and watching that performance improvement over time. So it's a fascinating journey, and it's wonderful working with some of these wonderful institutions that we are working with. And that is, across the world. We're working across UCLA, Johns Hopkins, Boston Children's, and people using it across the whole nursing and medical school. So not just a little pocket of use, ability to say, you can use this to scale training across your institution, assess performance if you want to, train people, even recruit people, as we're doing with some nurses in the UK, and be able to say this is a standardized measure of performance that you can watch develop over time. And in the UK, we are of course working extensively across the NHS. We do that both in universities, but in the NHS, we are now working with 85% of all hospitals in England in terms of training their doctors, particularly in diabetes, but in lots of other scenarios as well. We do a load of custom content, do our own content in-house. So there's lots of different ways of working and with engaging institutions. And it's fantastic to see them using it and scaling VR over time. So that's it from me, Claudia. I will be quiet and let you get on with things.
Thank you. And so our final panelist is Jacob Lowenstein, who is the head of business at Spatial, where he leads partnership sales and marketing. He came to Spatial from Samsung Next, where he previously led AR and VR investments in New York. And we have a video to play, and then I'll hand it over to him to tell you more.
It used to be that if you really wanted to jam on an idea or get creative, you'd get in a room with someone, even to the extent that you take a flight to do that. With Spatial, with AR and VR, we can put on a headset, and even if we're not in the same room as someone, we can feel like we are. From a simple 2D photo, you get a super realistic avatar. You can create these project rooms, kind of like a 3D version of Zoom meets Slack. Pull up all the kind of traditional content that you're used to, organize your thoughts. Spatial gives you like a visual, virtual way to bring all that together. Oculus is investing so heavily just across every layer of the stack, whether it's the development, the hardware, the outreach. They're loaning devices to companies who are VR curious, and I think they understand what kind of features developers want. Now we can enrich our app with hand tracking. I mean, I love the simplicity of just the headset in your hands. There's an opportunity with this new wave to like get in there early, put our humanistic ideals into the technology so that it can be creative and collaborative and bring us closer together.
Great, thank you. Jacob, I'm going to hand it over to you quickly.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Claudia, and thank you, David, for organizing this, and to all the wonderful other panelists who have shared their backgrounds and visions. My story, very briefly, is gasp. I am not a doctor. You have like an outsider in your midst, but I promise you, I'm medical adjacent. My father, my sister, my uncle, my father-in-law on both sides are all doctors, so I'm the black sheep of the family in that regard. My journey to the industry very, very quickly is in some ways we found each other. It was neither like I chose it or it chose me. I did my undergrad at Princeton here in the US, where I focused on the intersection of media and technology. Basically, how does the way that we consume and produce information shape how we see the world? Started my career at a hedge fund called Bridgewater, but after a couple of years moved over to a media startup called BuzzFeed here in the US that thought very deeply about how to craft stories and create information that's more consumable by people. And that was like my gateway drug really to virtual and augmented reality. Oculus was purchased by Facebook back in 2014, which really I think was a signal to the world that we should be paying attention to this. And it certainly was a signal to me. So I went to grad school at MIT. I founded MIT's first ever overarching VR AR group, which is actually how I met Justin way back in the day. We were both sort of at the beginning of this thing in Boston. I think we met each other online getting a slice of pizza or something. And also co-founded the MIT Media Lab's VR AR hackathon, which happens every year. That led me to Samsung. I had sort of developed this expertise in looking out at the world of VR and AR and figuring out which opportunities did or didn't make sense. And one opportunity that made a lot of sense to us at Samsung was this company called Spatial, which at that time was really just a tiny startup founded by two of the world's leading 3D interface designers. The CEO, Anand, he previously sold his last company, Bumtop, to Google, which pioneered touchscreen interfaces. Our chief product officer, another co-founder, Jinha, basically designed the world's first holographic computer at the MIT Media Lab while he was getting his PhD, and went on to become the lead interface designer for all of Samsung's TVs. I invested in Spatial and then later became so obsessed with them, I couldn't help but join full time. And so investment time plus being there full time, I've been with Spatial about 4 years. And to put it very succinctly, because I know the video gave a pretty good illustration of what we do. What you've heard from the other panelists who are literally doctors and medical professionals is that they've developed systems of training and working that are like very deeply focused on specific areas of medicine, right? Like you are targeting some of the deepest experts in the world who need to work together and do a really, really specific thing very well, like, hammer a nail into a tibia or whatever it is. Spatial is broader. So instead of going deep, we go broad. You should think of Spatial in the way you probably think of using a system like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Slack for how you collaborate. So we handle that meta coordination layer. So if you think about all those quick times during your day-to-day, whether you're working with other medical professionals or working with patients, when you need to have a more transient interaction, where the goal of the interaction is to just talk or exchange a piece of information very quickly, visualize it, annotate it, that is really what Spatial is about. So people that use Spatial either use us because they're preparing some like very in-depth presentation, or because they're really jumping into that sort of transient type of coordinating conversation that we are so used to having in the day-to-day. And so I've used Spatial as really synergistic, complementary to the other types of use cases you've heard. And in terms of how Spatial is already being used, we're used in broadly in healthcare. Our sort of entry point really, I think, was more on the pharma side. folks using us for things like rearranging, how they plan a factory or sharing research. And we've now started to break through on more of the side of medical practitioners as well, and have folks in hospitals like Cornell Weill using us to coordinate their work in the day-to-day. So to summarize it, right, when you think about spatial, if you just wish you could ever hop in a room with someone, whether it's another medical professional or a patient, and you just wanted it to be that easy, that's what spatial is. It's the feeling like you could just pop into a room, be it a conference room, an office or an auditorium, and just have a conversation and share what's in your head with other people. That's what spatial is all about.
Thank you, Jacob. David, I'd like to do a quick time check. If you could let me know how much time we have left for the discussion we'd like to have.
Well, you've got 40 minutes. If you want to go beyond that, you've got plenty of time to talk. And I'm sure there's lots of interesting questions you can ask, and I'm sure our other resident speakers will also have questions of their own.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Over to you, Claudia.
All right, thank you. I just want to gauge for the questions. So I'd like to now just move to a discussion and ask a few questions of our panelists around this topic of training in medical and the medical field. So the first question I have is I'm going to direct it to Ryan at first, but then I'd like others to please chime in and provide their input. So we know the ecosystem in VR is already vast and presents a very broad range of solutions across many industries, as we've just seen. I'd love to understand how you see VR fitting into existing learning methodologies and practices. So get your take, and then others, as I said, can chime in.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's important to think of VR really as just a method of delivering content analogous to like a computer or the concept of a lecture or something along those lines. And so it really has applicability across a broad range of medical education. And I think historically, whether you're a doctor or a nurse or an EMT, generally medical education consists of a didactic component where you are just learning the facts about what you need to know. And then a skills building component where you're learning how to put in IVs or use a stethoscope. And then kind of like a simulation component where you are practicing the integration of that knowledge and skills in a realistic encounter. And in some cases that's facilitated by a mannequin or a standardized patient. And sometimes it's a really real life patient encounters that are facilitated or supervised. And I think VR has a place in all of these. And we have seen that from some of the presentations today, whether that is delivering didactic information about, anatomy in the human body, or in Osu's case, skills building around, specific procedures, or, like SimX or OMS, where this is more about the integration of all of those things. And so I think there's applicability in each of those areas, and VR, I think, is more or less adapted to teaching those concepts in each of those categories.
I think, just piggybacking on Ryan, and I don't want to take up too much time since I took up a huge amount of time, but I think just, returning to what is the problem you're trying to solve with VR, instead of just like, hey, let's use VR here and here and here. And so I think there are things that VR does really well and some things that it doesn't do super well. And so I think it's important to understand like what you're trying to do. And I think, in medical education, especially in the US, like we're having kind of not like a crisis, but a real moment of introspection. I think COVID has provided the opportunity that, we're really have a healthcare supply issue of a supply of healthcare providers. And so understanding what is the purpose of medical school, like what is the product that we're trying to produce, and then how can we produce that product better and faster in a consistent manner. And similarly in residency, understanding like we're now getting better about what is the skill set that we want everybody to graduate with. How do we ensure that we have those skills? So how do we assess them for those skills, and how do we provide a more consistent training kind of pipeline, instead of right now it's very random by chance. Or if you're looking at the medical device industry, they're like, how do we decrease the learning curve for these complex technologies that are better for patients? And so driving the key metric of making sure that these technologies are adopted in the first place and then used, because often the main limiting factor is around the ability and the proficiency of the individuals in the operating room to use the technology. So it's interesting because I find that, you know, there are applications of VR, like one of the ones I find challenging are like for anatomy, Ryan, right? It's like where it's obvious, like, oh yeah, it's like it would be great in 3D to look at anatomy, but how do you assess someone on that, and like what are you trying to teach them? And, you know, is that in addition to the dissections or prosections? Is it a substitute? And I think understanding that kind of like, this isn't like a I don't know how to pronounce that word, like an all-in-one solution for everything.
Yeah.
But in some cases it does replace things. In some cases it supplements. In some cases it's probably not a great solution.
Well, I think that focus on, as everyone's been saying, what are you trying to teach, entirely dictates the design of what you're producing. That sense of actually, what do you need to have in this scenario to be able to hit your learning objectives? Do you need to have NLP? Do you need to have hand control? Or actually, is it more about the accessibility and being able to deliver it in different ways? And then how much of it does need to be assessed and give immediate feedback and debrief, or how much of it can be, particularly in Jacob's case, a much more free-for-all exploratory way of doing VR. And there's absolutely no right or wrong approach to these. It's just, are you trying to solve a problem? Are you trying to let people explore and being able to develop what you want to from there? I think the answer, I think the answer to the question of, you know, where does this fit into what already exists? Part of it in simulation is we're just recreating an experience that people should be getting in real life. This is letting people practice and then give them structured feedback on it. And we're combining that sense of practice with the ability to scale and saying, now you don't need to have one or the other. This isn't about practice versus e-learning. It's about everything that's good about them both, being able to scale that practice and build that into training. And I totally agree. Definitely not a panacea. Whoever thinks that VR is going to cure the world of all its ills is not necessarily correct, but it is a fantastic tool for dealing with defined problems.
Just one, I'm going to state the obvious one quick thing, which is I think for some reason there's an impulse among users of new technology to believe that when it first comes out, it will do all the things, like one thing will do all the things you need it to do, right? Like I think for Americans, we think of it as like the America Online moment, where it's like, oh, you want to use a computer, you're going to log into one thing and it's going to take you to your news and it's going to help you connect with other people and it's going to help you do every single thing. When the reality is that basically small teams all focusing very deeply on different things actually build much better solutions focused on like one sort of critical use case. And so I think for folks listening to this panel, like you should think of VR in the same way. Like you should probably not go to one solution working under the assumption that this is the medical VR solution that's going to work in many different scenarios, but rather understand that each solution is largely tailored to focusing on a very specific type of value it's trying to add. And the beautiful thing is, like Claudia's, you know, facilitating this panel, she was here from Facebook. Facebook's job has been to make it really, really easy for you to procure a number of different solutions and be able to use them seamlessly depending on the use case, right? So like, don't worry about that part. That's already taken care of. And because that's taken care of, it's very easy for you to focus on, you know, a solution for a very particular kind of training. And then when you're ready to focus on more general collaboration, you can switch to that use case with literally the push of a button. It's that easy. So the learning curve is zero.
I think, you know, we've really gone beyond sort of like one headset, one application, and just doubling down on what Jacob said is that you have this, you know, incredibly affordable piece of hardware that is the most amazing technology I've ever seen. And it has this cascading value proposition. It's just, you can do it for so many different things with one single piece of technology that is so powerful. And I think it's just this ecosystem that Oculus for Business and Claudia has put together is I think where the true power of VR starts to shine, where you don't have to sacrifice breadth for focus, because you can have focused applications to solve a large number of problems all at once with a single piece of hardware.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, give a nod to Facebook definitely for getting VR headsets out there more globally. That's what's helping drive all of this forward and helping make this much more part of the mainstream. People expect nowadays to be taught in VR. You know, medical schools are buying Oculus Quest 2s for all of their medical students to be able to further that training. And that's a lovely thing to be able to see. that development over the last 3 years has really actually expanded and has driven that growth. I think the other element alongside this is we're talking about integration and the fact that it's not a panacea, and it relates to the fact we don't want people to be scared of this, is that sense of, because it is just a tool to be used, you can absolutely still teach around this. The educators, we've been talking about debrief, the educators can still debrief around this. We are just providing the experience to let them scale their training, and they can still do everything they would be doing normally in terms of debrief, in terms of support, to be able to help their students through that journey. So it does just become something that helps them do their job rather than replaces anything they would be doing.
Yeah, you know, just to build off that real quick too, I mean, we've definitely found for our customers, it is often an augmentation of existing methodologies more so than a full replacement. And, you know, whether in the future it's going to shift into a full replacement, I think is up for question. But, you know, I think there are things that VR does that nothing else does. I mean, especially in the simulation space, the fact that you can simulate the environment along with the patient encounter is really critical, right? Because if you are, I'm an emergency medicine doctor, and when you have a trauma come in, half of your job at least is managing the room and the chaos of the room and the team, as much as it is managing the patient and making sure you're giving them the correct treatment. And that's just hard to do with existing sim modalities. And so I think in the near term, you can certainly make an argument for having a fully fledged mannequin-based simulation center with all of the trimmings. And then in addition to that, still investing in VR because of the unique capabilities that it has.
So I wanted to kind of move on to my next question, actually. I think this is a nice segue. And I'd love to talk about, we've talked about all the opportunities that we have. I'd love to speak a little bit about the barriers to adoption that we see today. And I'd like to start with Justin to get your input.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's obviously the current environment has driven a lot of interest and wide-scale adoption of VR. There are still some challenges. I find that the technology is almost too awesome. So it's like people are wanting it to do like, you know, always the next level. It's like, well, we need this one thing like time travel. And it's like, well, actually, you know, if you look at the research, the technology is there right now. So this sort of setting expectations and mental state, I think is one barrier that you need to get around. It's an interesting space in medical education and surgical training in VR where people have a lot of baked in kind of assumptions of what this technology should or shouldn't do. I think another barrier is access to content. I think that's probably one of the biggest barriers. And so, you know, people are like, oh, this is great. Like this will train one person to do this one thing, but, you know, we have 100 things that we need people to be able to do, or thousands. And so, you know, being able to get access to a library or pick a partner that can kind of get you the content that you need at scale and fast enough. So that is a huge barrier, I would say, of adoption as well. And the last one I would say is structure. And so, you can have the greatest VR experience in the world, but you know, if it's just sitting on your desk, it's not doing a whole lot. So you really need to have a clear plan around how you're going to implement it. And once again, like, what are you trying to do with it, and how are you going to measure that change? And you know, we've seen like you know, very clearly in our own data that for sort of organizations that have no plan, there's an initial spike in usage because it's so exciting and awesome, like whatever you have in a headset, but then it'll tail off because no one understands why they're supposed to use it or what they're trying to accomplish. But when you have even a simple plan or a structure in place on how you want to utilize VR as part of your organization to solve problems, it just goes up and up. And so those are sort of the three elements I would say in terms of expectation, content, and structure or a plan.
And I like,
you know, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Okay.
Please, Jack,
I'll
you were about to jump in. Go for it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I completely agree with that idea of structure. And it's, I think, in two forms for me. One is having the people in the organization who are going to be doing that. Having a champion there who gets the problem and can see the solution and is trying to drive it forward at grassroots level. And the other one is having someone at a higher level, an executive sponsor, if you like, a kind of CIO level person who's willing to take that chance and go, actually, I agree with what you've done. I've seen the results of your pilot and I want to be able to scale it. And being able to link those two stakeholders, hopefully in an organization with an innovation pathway. And it's a lot of what we've seen in terms of the differences between people. and this is not a VR specific problem, this is an innovation specific problem generally, is the sense of some organizations get how to implement technology. They have a clear pathway with clear benchmarks and know how to assess. And others don't. Others really don't know what to do, and you have to guide them on that journey. And that can be, don't get me wrong, more exciting in many ways, but it does produce more work for people like us being able to get into institutions. Along with that, a lot of it is education still. You know, people are, particularly in healthcare, we are deliberately risk averse, which is generally quite a good thing. But in this kind of environment where you're wanting to implement technology quickly, that can be a bit of a barrier. And I know that we've all experienced COVID has blown that out the water. And actually suddenly people realize the value of this and have to get it in because there's no other solution. So actually that's broken down a lot of barriers for people to be able to get innovation throughout healthcare systems.
I'll add one more very spatial specific barrier to entry, right? But we are a collaboration solution. So we depend on everyone being equally empowered to participate in the interaction, right? It's like thinking about the early days of the internet where everyone needed an internet connection to participate. Well, when you're thinking about VR collaboration, the initial thought that a lot of people have is, well, I guess every single person that wants to be in this collaboration needs a VR headset. And I think that, you know, just time itself is a barrier in that it takes time to roll out something new and procure headsets and distribute headsets and train. And I think that fear of the time and effort that will be required can often stall things in their infancy. And so what we've done to ameliorate that is super straightforward, which is we've basically said, like, we are going to enable people that don't have VR and people that do have VR to all work together regardless. So you can join a collaborative spatial meeting, yes, in a VR headset, but also in your web browser without installing anything, or in our mobile apps that work on iOS and Android. And, you know, is the web experience or the mobile experience as immersive, as powerful as the immersive, you know, Quest 2 experience? Absolutely not. But that's by design. But because it still is accessible, it allows people to get a preview and still participate so they can understand the why. They can see what they're missing out on. And that creates bottoms up pressure that drives more rapid adoption of the technology. And I think that's a really, really crucial part of it, because I think if I were to ask Ryan and I were to ask Justin, and I were to ask Claudia and Jack, like, how hard is it to show VR without just putting someone in a headset? I'm sure everyone would probably vigorously nod their head and be like, one of the most frustrating things is how you communicate this and show the value to people without putting them in a headset, which is especially difficult during COVID. And that's a lot of what we've worked on, is helping people appreciate the value, even if they don't have a headset. So it creates further demand for pushing adoption, and that speeds up and charges through the barriers. Because otherwise, if you need to wait to put a headset on someone, it's really going to slow down adoption.
Yeah, I agree with all the points I think that have been made so far, especially the idea about some of the challenges around organizations having a plan for utilization of this technology. I wanted to comment on a couple of things that I think people assume are barriers that I think are not so much anymore. One being the usability of the hardware. I think with really the Oculus Quest and some of the other all-in-one headsets out there, we've finally reached a point where you don't need to have a tech team to facilitate your hardware. You don't need to be very facile, generally speaking, with technology to be able to set it up. And that's been a huge boon. But I think there's still some remnants in people's minds of what old VR used to be. We encounter problems, and I'm sure many of you do, where we'll say, oh, why don't you put on this headset? And they say, well, I've done VR before. I put my phone into a piece of cardboard and I was on a roller coaster and I threw up 30 seconds in. And so I don't do VR. I don't like VR. Right. And I have to swear up and down to them that they will not get sick in these newer headsets. And then once I convince them, 98% of the time, it's not a problem. 2% of the time, they still get sick and then they never trust me again. But that's very, very rare with current technology. And then the other thing I think that is less of a barrier than people might assume is the evidence. I think for most things in the healthcare space, people say, well, the evidence has got to be there. You got to have the studies. I think the power of VR is such that the benefits are very obvious. And at least in the simulation space, the competition is $100,000 mannequins with very obvious limitations in terms of realism. And so the bar is actually quite low. And so I think when you're bringing a new technology into that space, it very often is not necessarily about, show me by the numbers that it's getting better, though that is very helpful. It's about getting them in the headset and them seeing just very obviously the tremendous benefits over current technology, both in terms of realism and in terms of the logistics and the operations of it. And I think very few of our customers, at least, have really asked us for much in the way of evidence.
That's right. It's funny. This is going to sound random, Ryan, but you just triggered something in my brain in a positive way, which is like, because we're always like, VR feels like this new space age thing, and we're always trying to help people understand that it's just another one of those similar things they've seen in the past. And to some extent, I sort of see the evolution of VR being weirdly analogous to like air travel. Like when it first is offered, you're like, well, where do I even need to go? And I don't want to get on that thing. It's going to be bumpy and horrible. It's just not worth it, right? And then over time, it's like the experience becomes smoother, more destinations are built that you want to fly to. And then suddenly, like one time you decide, oh yeah, it's worth getting on that flight again. And next thing you know, you flew to this mind-blowing destination. You're like, oh, this is amazing. I'm going to do this all the time now. And that is the moment we've reached in VR, where it's like you have, several companies here that are all offering like extremely valuable destination. The ride is not at all bumpy anymore. I mean, literally you have organizations like the AARP who are putting retirees in VR and deriving huge value from it, right? So if it's at the point where like there's, even people that you think might be the most averse to types of new technology are deriving more benefit from it, there's just not an excuse anymore. And so it's to the point where you can just put someone in a headset, they can have no idea what they're doing, and without needing to give them much handholding at all, they're actually going to have an extremely positive experience. And so mark my words, it's 2020. There are a lot of bad reasons to remember this year, but we should also remember it as the year where VR has finally solved all of those core problems and all those, as Ryan said, all those big barriers to entry.
Hey, thanks, Jacob. I had a follow-up question for you. Specifically, you talked about how collaboration is broad as a use case, and I like to think of it as horizontal because it touches literally everything you can do in VR. And what we're talking about here in terms of medical training, and VR is more what we like to say is a vertical use case. I'd love to understand how you think of collaboration being able to enable learning or make learning more efficient or take learning to the next level. Like what is that intersection point between collaboration and learning? I'm assuming you're thinking about that as you think about your technology.
So much. Claudia, I'm like so happy you asked that question because it's something that is so firmly on our mind all the time. I'll put it this way. Before PowerPoint, when people wanted to, communicate in a presentation or something like that, their first impulse was not to make a presentation or a slideshow. It was basically to like stand up and talk. And then people realized that the barrier between communication and teaching and learning is no barrier at all. There's actually incredible overlap between any of these things that we might think about as different. And I think about leveraging VR collaboration is the next step in this sort of evolution where, to have even a presentation like we're doing today, the natural convenient thing is for us to hop on video chat and we can either share a video or one slide of information. And that's the easiest way to have that communication. But in spatial, right, we could literally all hop into a room together. And not only could we share all of that existing information, but we could organize it spatially. We could present it in an animated fashion. And we could make the whole thing far more immersive and dynamic, right? And the question always comes like, why do you do that? And it's because the deeper why of why we communicate, why we present, why we meet with other people is usually because we're either trying to review something together or trying to mutually teach one another something that we want to impress upon the other person, right? And so clarity of understanding and recall, the ability to clearly understand and then actually remember that information and recall it and apply it at a later time is the whole goal of communication. So when we talk about like the value, the importance of learning and designing a collaboration tool in spatial, it's because we think that communication platforms that are horizontal need to evolve to just being about communicating and hoping that people retain information, to making teaching and presenting a much more easy and readily available part of how we communicate with one another. And what this means in a very practical sense, right, is I'll give you an example, right? Like we have a doctor who's been using spatial to meet with patients and share ultrasound results, right? And the question is like, why does this person need spatial to share ultrasound results? Well, they could call this person on the phone, or they could send them an image, and certainly that's one way to try and share it. But the ability to share a variety of scans into spatial, physically be with that person, and have a variety of tools such as a whiteboard, or such as being able to, access any other bit of information they need to actually tell the story of what's happening with these results, is a massive difference between what's enabled through current tools, right? And so the only way we could think about having this kind of conversation currently is if we were like face to face and had a room with all of this expensive equipment to show this. But now with spatial, we've managed to virtualize that whole experience. So in short, if you've ever hoped that, for better patient outcomes or for sharing research, what you needed to do was a better way to illustrate and teach, because that's a core need of what medical communication requires. Then we really put that into the heart of the product in spatial to make sure that we go beyond just sharing slides to making every conversation an opportunity to teach and impress learnings upon one another.
Thank you. Does anyone want to add anything to this in this question before I move on to the next one?
I think I do believe in the power of collaboration. I think ultimately that's what's going to drive a lot of widespread adoption. But just one thought on the previous question is, I think in terms of barriers to adoption and challenges is that not all VR is created equal. And I think right now we sort of lack a way for kind of the users out there to understand what different options bring them. And there's no sort of like rating scale or various way to compare like one VR experience objectively to another. And so I think, as Ryan says, the bar is I think it's high in some senses, where there seems to be like a lot of evidence that people require sometimes as unnecessary, but it's also low in that people will in some cases use almost anything, and then that will color their perception of VR and their experience. And a lot of the hardware related stuff has gone away. Like Ryan was talking about, like you don't get sick anymore. The technical setup is very easy, but if you find just some random experience somewhere, maybe on you side load it and it's not through the Oculus store or not through OFB, and then that can color your perception of VR for quite some time, and you just assume that it's all the same. And when much like books are different, websites are different, mobile phone apps are all highly variable quality, now we have this same challenge here. And so I think in healthcare especially, having some sort of way that we assess the different categories of VR applications and how we think about determining and comparing them against each other will be important over time. I don't think we need it immediately because it's still a relatively concentrated area, but it is something I notice.
Agreed. That's a fantastic point, Justin. I couldn't agree with you more. It's something that we, my organization spends a lot of time looking across the ecosystem, thinks about a lot these days as sort of where we go next. And actually, again, this is a great segue to my next question, because I would love to ask each of you to talk a little bit about where you see the future. What does it hold for us, especially in healthcare? Where do we go from here? So who would like to start? Ryan, maybe? I don't know. I'm going to pick on you.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. I think there's probably a couple different ways to answer this question. I think from a technology perspective, I think I will be very interested to see what happens in the world of tactile tools. I think now that we're getting more and more adoption of VR headsets, you're going to see more of a market for tools that deliver a tactile experience to go along with it. And, I think you could make a whole discussion about this. There are, in general, I think the tactile feedback is a little bit overvalued in the minds of people who are not familiar with medical education. I think a lot of education is cognitive and not actually tactile outside of a few different stages in education. But I think admittedly, there are certain applications for which really high quality tactile experiences would be super valuable. And I think once we see that, that's where you're going to start transitioning from VR being an augmentation of some existing medical education tools to a full-on replacement. I think also on the technology side, I mean, I've hit this a few different times, but I really think the all-in-one headsets are the future of VR. I think that's been a little bit up in the air for the last couple of years, but I think this year especially has really cemented the fact that these all-in-one headsets, because of the usability benefits, are going to be where things will move in the future. From a software and application side, you know, I think many of us are here talking about VR in education because education is where I think VR has moved first for a variety of reasons. One being that nobody dies in an educational scenario if the technology fails. But ideally. I think as, yeah, yeah, no real humans die. But I do expect that we're going to see VR and AR and mixed reality expanding more into clinical spaces. There's a few specific, I think, applications that are probably going to move first in terms of, you know, augmenting your OR experience to be able to provide data or overlays, things like that. But I think that's maybe a 5-year kind of time horizon.
Yeah, I think the additional component, I guess, on the tech side is, you know, absolutely hands and haptics. And I agree with Ryan that actually, particularly in medicine and nursing, maybe not as important as people tend to feel. But I think one thing that is this idea of communication skills and emotive teaching, being able to do proper natural language processing to develop communication skills training to teach people how to break bad news for someone with cancer, and being able to do that realistically at scale across the world, doing it in a way that is culturally sensitive, I think will become increasingly important on the technology side. In terms of hardware, I completely agree. It is the standalone headsets and the normalization of VR. Just people having headsets at home, it doesn't become a thing anymore because everyone is already doing it. And then on the breadth of content, I think there's so much that we can do in healthcare and VR. The question is, where do you start and how do you expand? And I think now there is this explosion of content in terms of people developing their own, in terms of people partnering to develop content between industry and academia, and content platforms where you can actually design your own content. And I think that rising content over the next 5 years, combined with the propagation of hardware and things like hand control and voice control, will really drive this forward.
Yeah, I think you know, in terms of just you know, the ecosystem is one thing that's driving it forward. So, you know, you kind of have this perpetual motion machine of a VR ecosystem where you have more sort of segmented kind of focus areas develop and specialization. And so that, you know, that all of our applications and platforms together further drive adoption of VR in general. And so I think that's one thing that's going to drive things forward. And then I think, you know, through strategic partnerships and big vision, I think, you know, like Tim alluded to in his last talk, like Johnson & Johnson, you know, really leaned in quite early to partnering with Facebook and Oculus for Business and our company, and with a very just bold vision. And, you know, there's a lot of interest right now in VR, and certainly a large number of people implementing things. But to actually like do an at-scale digital transformation, leveraging VR and other technologies, takes a lot of sort of political will and braveness that I think is quite hard. You know, especially for I think Jack was alluding to that by nature we're very conservative in healthcare, and so you know, there's many professional organizations we speak to, many large hospital systems that are so excited about this technology, and then they're like, I can't wait for someone to do something about it at scale, you know, and it's like, well, we'll come back when all the hard work's done. And it's people that are like, not only do I want to use this technology, I want to be involved in sort of getting it ready at scale. I think that is what's going to drive adoption. A few more of those key players really leaning in and getting involved in a big way.
Totally. I think I'll mirror, I think, the frameworks that you guys have used because I think it's effective. I think I'll try and do this from our perspective. So on the hardware side, I think what we're most excited about in terms of near future development is blurring the lines a bit more between VR and AR. So for example, like Facebook has been working on a feature called pass-through that will hopefully come out in the near future, but this is the ability to turn on the cameras on the front part of your headset so that you could seamlessly go between feeling like you're fully immersed in a space to still seeing your real living room or office around you, right? And in our experience, you know, we talked about barriers to entry. We've maybe kind of overlooked one of the most obvious ones, which is like being in VR is just like a new weird thing. We're used to being able to always see like the real world around us. Everything we do is grounded in the real world. So asking people to eschew that for periods of time is just, it's impulsively hard for some people, but the ability for people to take even a 10-second breather to just like reorient themselves, or, you know, their child taps on their leg or their dog, you know, walks up to them. It just allows VR to more seamlessly embed into the natural habits of real life. And we're so close to that innovation becoming widely available. So on the hardware side, we think a lot about that. You know, our application, because it's focused on collaboration, it's communication and empathy are very central to the spatial experience, right? Like right now, part of why we like Zoom is because we could see each other's face. I can gesticulate with my hands. You can hear, you know, I have some control over the intonation of my voice. And right now, for example, our avatars are lifelike, but we don't have sensors on the headset that allow us to animate the faces of the avatar even further, right? And so we're doing what we can to even further animate our avatars and bring them to life so that they mirror what you're actually doing in real life. And that's coming pretty soon. Like we've gotten to the point where we can use the front camera on a phone, for example, to fully animate an avatar's face, and in the near future headsets will enable that as well. And then lastly, I will really echo Justin's point. I do think, I think that it's really hard to think that we have to, like, independent of a lot of the other powerful players in the world of technology, whether they're system integrators or other OEMs, to make VR popular, when in reality, it does take strategic partnerships to kind of absorb some of the risk and push technology into people's hands. It's not always the pull, but sometimes there's a push as well. And I think the thing that's really encouraging that I'm seeing is that some of the parties that have been responsible for kind of distributing some previous major innovations in technology, be it like phones or laptops or new software, are now more and more into the VR game and are looking to push out this technology because they see the opportunity. And so you're going to increasingly, I think, see things like VR headsets getting bundled with, you know, like purchases of multiple types of technology that you bring into the OR or into universities or whatever it is. And that will accelerate adoption, and it will, you know, put a little bit more oil in the mechanism that puts VR in the hands of people. And the more people that try VR, as you mentioned, given the wonderful applications that exist and how great the technology is, they're going to fall in love with it and they're going to insist on using it. And so those three things together will really bend the knee of the curve to grow this in a pretty exponential way.
Thank you, Jacob. I think we're almost at time. I think we have about 2 minutes left. So I wanted to, first of all, thank you all the panelists for all your time and all your really incredible insights in this conversation. Thank you to David for having us for this discussion. So I want to maybe hand it back to you, David, and see if you want to close this. I think many of us have to drop at the hour.
Yeah, thank you very much, Claudia. And I just want to reiterate what you just said, to say thank you to your panelists and to you especially for moderating a great panel discussion. Very interesting to hear these guys. Somebody as old as me, when I look at you guys involved in VR, I think you're far too young to be whiz businessmen pushing back the boundaries. It's the same kind of feeling that I had when I used to watch footballers, and they seem to get younger all the time. So anyway, congratulations all of you on the work that you're doing. I do apologize for the technical problems and having to switch back to Zoom at short notice. Unfortunately, as some of you know from trying to get into the lobby and access the technology, there were some difficulties. And unfortunately, although I tried this morning to start the first session, I quickly realized that it wasn't going to work the way that I needed it to do to be in a professional standard. So I will be making sure that the organisers of the Giant Conference make this recording accessible to all of the people at the Giant event. And certainly will be accessible to you. It's still being streamed live on YouTube, so there will be that will be available on my 360 and 360 YouTube channel. I have the link to that, and also the recording. The whole thing's been recorded, but I would like to separate out this panel discussion that you've moderated, Claudia, and make that available to all you guys to use in any way that you think fit. I just want to close really by asking the other presenters who have stuck with us to the end. We have Steve Dunn and we have David Salt. They did some interesting presentations. David in particular with his physical environment that you see behind him rather than the VR headset. The projected scenarios on the wall is something that's not been covered by any of the other presenters that we've had this afternoon. Steve, would you like to make any comments or observations before we close?
Oh, thank you, David. Well, I just to say that it's been a fascinating afternoon, and I think it's the last session has been extremely illuminating. It's been fantastic to hear from everybody. Yes, I've been in AR and VR for a long time, and it's really exciting to see that I think we're now actually on the cusp of VR to actually sort of getting adopted properly around the world, and that's the most exciting thing that I've taken away from this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Steve. And I'll go over to David now, and David Salt. You can see the environment he's got behind him. With a medical video going in the background. David, what would you like to say?
No, I think it's been a very useful afternoon. Great to see the technology being used in the medical profession. We're slightly different. We're always, worry about the shared VR. But, the technology will allow us to cross over as well. So that's been really interesting.
Okay, and I think with that, I'd just like to thank everybody once again and draw this session to a close. So I'm going to stop recording now and thank you for all your contributions and your participation.